This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
The London Assembly is the voice of London, composed of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and scrutinise his policies. Can I welcome members, officers and the public here in the gallery and watching on the webcast to today's session. This is a Mayor's Question Time meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. In case of an emergency, and if there's any need to exit the building, guests seated in the public gallery should follow security staff, and Assembly members should follow the meeting clerk. Please may I remind you to silence your devices, and can I ask the Mayor and members to position their microphones so that they can be heard clearly? Can you hear me?
Yes, Chair.
Well, that's where you should put your microphone. Members are also reminded that any electronic devices should not be placed in front of the microphones. Can I also ask the clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm any apologies for absence?
We have apologies, Chair, from Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you. Before... and I'm sure the Assembly would want to. I'm sure the Assembly would thoughts are with Assembly Member Bailey, who is suffering a bereavement at the moment. Before we begin, I would like to welcome to the public gallery MSc Democracy students from University College London. Thank you. Yeah, there's quite a few. Chances are I got drunk with some of them. So since the last Assembly member meeting on the 8th of June, the Environment Committee wrote to the Mayor with 3 recommendations on how to help wild spaces flourish in London. The Budget and Performance Committee examined issues of choice and delivery of the Mayor's capital spending projects, focusing on Transport for London and the GLA's affordable housing programme. As part of an investigation into community energy, the Environment Committee visited Leaside Trust to see how community energy projects could play a vital role in helping Londoners' communities utilise renewable energy and keep energy bills down. For the second of two meetings on childcare in London, the Economy Committee discussed the opportunities and challenges faced by the childcare sector. The Transport Committee considered how London's river transport service could expand with investment and examined the existing use of light freight. The GLA Oversight Committee met to examine the financial environmental costs of domestic and overseas trips taken by the Mayor, Deputy Mayors, mayoral appointees and GLA staff. And the Police and Crime Committee visited Birmingham to hear about how social justice charity Cranston, I think I pronounced that right, is working with West Midlands Police on a drug diversion programme, which aims to help break the cycle of crime relating to drug offending. We would like to congratulate all Londoners, as well as those from the GLA Group, the Metropolitan Police Service and the London Fire Brigade, who were included in His Majesty's, old habits, eh? His Majesty's the King's birthday honours list. Can I ask the Assembly to note the interest set out at item 2? Do Assembly members have any other disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality, which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality? I have to pause, look, give people a chance. No, there aren't. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm the minutes of the Mayor's question time and plenary meetings held on the 18th of May 2023 to be signed by me as correct records? Agreed. Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 5th of May to the 8th of June 2023? The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, Chairman. Hoping that my microphone's positioned correctly. Since the last Mayor's question time, I've been focused on the issues that matter most to Londoners, working tirelessly to build a greener, safer, fairer and more prosperous London for everyone. The cost of living crisis continues to hit communities in London, with the government's handling of the economy leading to high inflation, high interest rates and higher mortgages for millions of Londoners. City Hall is doing everything we can with the limited powers and resources we have to provide support to those most in need, including through our cost of living hub and free holiday meals, as well as plans to provide free school meals to all primary school children. But the government needs to urgently redouble its efforts. So some Londoners are now at serious risk of losing their homes. Figures show that a Londoner with a £350,000 mortgage coming to the end of a 2.5% fixed-term deal can expect to see their monthly costs increase by nearly £700. That's £8,400 a year. We're building a record number of affordable homes in the capital to address the housing crisis, more homes overall than any time since the 1930s. But the government now needs to step up with emergency support for households to prevent Londoners from losing their homes. I've written to the Housing Secretary and the Chancellor about the issue and will continue to put pressure on ministers to take the action that's desperately needed. That's all from me by way of opening statement, Chair, but I've had one request for an oral update on law breaking during the pandemic. Any police investigation is an operational matter for the Met Police Service and is not in my remit to direct. For my part, like most Londoners, I was and am shocked by the scandal. The recent emergence of footage of the party held at Conservative campaign headquarters on the 14th of December 2020 by the Conservative mayoral candidate and his team will have been deeply upsetting to many Londoners. The Conservative campaign team are shown dancing and mixing in close proximity with others at a pre-arranged Christmas party at a time when socialising indoors was banned in London. One of them is even heard to joke about, and I quote, bending the rules. Londoners will be asking questions about why such a party and that behaviour was thought appropriate. Even the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, Michael Gove, has condemned the party, calling it indefensible and saying it's terrible. I think it's completely out of order. Londoners will agree with him, but we've heard nothing from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the Conservative Assembly Group, or any of their current mayoral candidates. Londoners are furious. At a time when leading Conservatives were partying, Londoners faced tight restrictions on numbers at funerals. Many couldn't see their dying relatives in hospitals or in care homes. Weddings and other special family moments were cancelled. Women were giving birth alone, unable to see their close family. Members of City Hall staff upstairs have shared with me someone couldn't see their dad when he was dying in hospital. He's since lost his life. Another sat outside in a hospital car park for hours while their mum had chemotherapy alone. There are countless stories like this across London, including in my own family. It's heartbreaking, and the actions of Assemblymember Sean Bailey and his team are simply indefensible, and yet they are being rewarded. The Met Police Service Commissioner has said publicly during the last few days that the MPS is not routinely reopening every historic allegation, but they are prepared to do so in particularly serious or concerning cases. He has said that the MPS investigation team are looking into whether the video footage that recently emerged provides a basis for further investigation. I've always been clear that nobody is above the law. Those who broke the rules at a time when the public were being asked to make huge sacrifices should be held to account for their actions, not rewarded.
Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously, our condolences to Assemblymember Bailey on his loss that has prevented him from coming here this morning. But I think the issues that relate to the video footage and also the invitation that was sent out talking about jingling and mingling, when mingling was specifically something we were asked not to do, overrides that. I think there are some really important principles relating to the Nolan principles of public life and showing a better standard of upholding the law amongst people who have been elected. And on that basis, I hear what you say about the peerage in the House of Lords, but we have someone who now may then be subject to a new police investigation.
Assemblymember, the job of this
Sorry,
Assembly...
I'm just going to ask a question.
Yes, and I'm just chairing.
Do you mind? Yes.
The job of this Assembly is to hold the Mayor to account, not other Assembly members,
No, I'm
by
not.
which there are routes for
if you don't mind,
satisfaction.
if I could just finish my question. Thank you, Chair. Do you think it's appropriate that a member of this Assembly should be on the Police and Crime Committee when subject to an investigation, chair one of our committees when subject to an investigation, or indeed is it appropriate that they should accept or indeed be offered a peerage in the House of Lords? Does it not bring all of us in public life?
Assemblymember,
Does
the
it not bring
opinions
all of
of
us
the Mayor on how
Does
we
it not
chair
bring all of
things
us
and how the
into
Assembly...
in public life?
Please finish your comments.
Yes.
The opinions on the Mayor on how we do our business is not relevant to this forum.
Does it not bring all of us in public life into
well,
disrepute?
that's fine, but that's fine. That is your opinion, and there are other routes for you
I do
to
hope this is
pursue
not going to be taken off my time. Does this not bring all of us in public life into disrepute?
Assemblymember, this is not the business of this Assembly. And therefore, I'm going to ask you to bring bring it back to the Assembly. The Mayor's competencies.
I'm sorry. The Mayor is in public life, and I am asking if it does not bring all of us in public life. And the Mayor will obviously include himself and mayoral candidates in his reply. And I would really appreciate it if you would stop interrupting me. Thank you. I'd like to hear from the Mayor.
Chair, I think we've got to accept, whether you're a member of the Assembly, the Mayor, a parliamentarian in the Commons or the Lords, or a councillor, this is a plague on all our houses. Not just rule makers being rule breakers, but the perception there's one rule for one group of people and one group and one rule for another. And it is serious, the points that are being made. But it's not simply no action being taken, the concern the public have, but it's the reward that goes with supporting the disgraced Prime Minister at the time, who was also a rule breaker. And I think those who don't condemn this behaviour, those who silence an acquiescence to promotion to the Lords, will regret that in the long term.
I just wanted to ask the Mayor one further question, and I just wondered if the Mayor is likely to be posing anytime soon with any of the Assembly members similar to this photograph.
Well, Chair, I think it's for others to explain their own behaviour, whether that was the wisest thing to do.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, we in the Green Group are deeply concerned by the new evidence that has emerged that the Mayor has just raised involving the conduct of a member of the Police and Crime Committee, which I chair. All of us in the Assembly have a responsibility to uphold the highest standards in public office. We are the voice of London, and Londoners expect us to abide by the law. I personally would like to request a meeting with the leader of the Conservative group to discuss this matter, and I would just like to know whether the Mayor has asked for that. My question to the Mayor is, I would like to know whether he has requested a meeting with the leader of the Conservative group. Thank you.
Chair, no, I haven't requested such a meeting with the leader of the Conservative group.
No, thank you very much. We now move on to the priority order paper. Each group is allocated amount of time. Oh, I beg your pardon.
Can I just flag there's something funny going on with the clock. So the Greens are taking my time. The Labour clock went on with only a minute. Something weird's going on. So we need to address that.
We'll look into it. We shall do that. Thank you. As I said, we now move to the questions on the priority order paper. Each group is allocated an amount of time to ask their questions that is proportionate to their size. The first question is number 2528, the continuing impact of government's November 2022 budget on London, from Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this question, which I know has got huge salience amongst Londoners across our city. I'm deeply concerned by the financial impact high interest rates are having on homeowners who are facing a combination of higher mortgage payments, rising costs and below inflation wage growth. Last month, the Resolution Foundation estimated that 1.6 million UK households with fixed rate deals set to expire in the coming year will see their annual mortgage bills rise on average by £2,900. Considering London's higher house prices, the bill for Londoners is likely to be even higher. Increasing interest rates are the Bank of England's response to spiralling inflation, which was caused in large part by the government's disastrous mini-budget last year. And this week, it was confirmed that inflation remains at 8.7%, with the Bank of England set to increase interest rates later on this morning. Ministers must act to ensure Londoners don't pay the price for the government's mismanagement of the economy by losing their homes. This should start with changing the support for mortgage interest scheme back to a grant to provide a more robust safety net for low-income homeowners. I've also called on the government to reinstate the mortgage rescue scheme, which allowed struggling households to stay in their home by selling it to a social landlord and living there as a tenant, or by selling a stake to the government and paying a mortgage for a reduced amount. Economic challenges mean some households may struggle with fluctuating incomes, so the government should work with lenders to ensure homeowners are offered appropriate breathing space if a downturn in income means they temporarily cannot afford their mortgage, as was the case during the pandemic. It's equally important to highlight that continued growth in rent is severely impacting renters too. The affordability crisis in the private rented sector is leading to dramatic homelessness figures, with London councils estimating that one child in every London classroom is homeless. To support struggling renters, I'm asking the government to give me the power to introduce a rent freeze in London and to lift the freeze on local housing allowance rates and realigning them with median local rents. Ministers must respond to the housing crisis with urgency and provide the funding necessary to support homeowners and renters through this challenging period.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And last week, I was deeply disturbed by the experiences of one of my constituents who worked as a social care worker for 45 years and was going back to the workplace so that their children could keep up with their mortgage payments. After retiring, going back to the workplace on a minimum wage, it's really having a devastating impact on Londoners. In my constituency in Harrow, we have some of the largest rates of households with mortgages, with in some wards 41% of residents in Pinner South, 40% in Headstone Lane, and 39% of households in Hatch End with a mortgage. On some of these new build private estates, especially naming the Kodak estate in Harrow, 91% of households have a mortgage. They will all be impacted, and we know that as these mortgages rise, it will hit Londoners harder due to our higher house prices. In May 2023, you called on the government to apologise for the soaring mortgage rates. They still haven't done so. Do you still agree that the government should hold their hands up and apologise to Londoners and the country?
Well, not only do they not apologise for breaking the law, they don't apologise for financial mismanagement that's causing households to face the real challenges you are talking about. And it's worth reminding ourselves that a lot of the people you're talking about on the Kodak estate, may have got a mortgage 2 years ago in advance of the stamp duty changes, and so the 2-year fixed term deal is coming to an end, and the average mortgage is higher in London because house prices are larger in London, and the proportion of equity is smaller because of the cost of housing in London. And I worry a lot of these families, your constituents, won't keep their head above the water if the government doesn't step in this week and provide them with support, which could mean in weeks to come you'll be telling me about those same people being homeless, which is a travesty.
Absolutely tragic situation. And later today, we are expecting the Bank of England to announce further interest rate rises, which will push mortgages even higher. The Chancellor said that he would be comfortable with interest rates rising to a level where they tipped Britain into recession if that was the price to pay. You've already mentioned in your opening remarks 2 things that the government can do to ease the mortgage crisis on families. They could also give extended mortgage periods, working with banks to provide new products, as well as allow people to move into interest-only mortgages. That's practical things this government can do. Instead, they're holding their hands up. Is the response from this government to Londoners and the country good enough?
Well, I'm happy to share the letter I've written to Michael Gove and Jeremy Hunt. There's a summit tomorrow that they're hosting with lenders, and I've set out a number of things they could quite easily get the lenders to agree to. One of them you've just mentioned, converting a repayment mortgage to interest only for a period of time, having a moratorium for a period of time on mortgage holiday, making sure it doesn't affect their credit rating as well. A number of ideas we've given, extending the mortgage to alleviate them during this difficult time. I think this laissez-faire approach, the market knows best, us not interfering, and a recession being a price worth paying reminds those of us of a certain age in the 80s, high unemployment was a quote-unquote a price worth paying. That meant a generation written off, and I'm hoping the government's laissez-faire mismanagement as well as the laissez-faire doesn't lead to a generation of homeless people because of increased mortgage rates at a time when they can't afford to pay them.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Berry concerning the right to buy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. Right to buy was set up to provide council tenants with an affordable route into home ownership, but it's meant that more than 300,000 London council homes have been sold since the policy was introduced, and this hasn't been replenished. The policy isn't fulfilling its original goal of boosting owner occupation. While a lucky few benefit from large discounts to buy their council home ownership rates overall are flatlining. Families are now stuck for years in the private rented sector, where high rents prevent many from saving for a deposit. The number of ex-council homes that are snapped up by private landlords, often rented back to the very council that was forced to sell the home in the first place, is a stark reminder of how the policy doesn't work for modern London. The shortage of social rented homes is at the root of London's housing crisis. It's wrong that previous governments didn't prioritise replacing right-to-buy homes when the policy was first introduced. I welcome the changes the government recently introduced following lobbying by City Hall and London councils, particularly the move to allow councils to retain 100% of their right-to-buy receipts for sales from 2022 until 2024. However, the government needs to do more to guarantee like-for-like replacements. They need to remove the cap on the percentage of right-to-buy receipts that can be used for acquisitions, allow councils to combine right-to-buy receipts with other forms of grant, and allow councils to use retained right-to-buy receipts to fund at least 50% of scheme development costs. I'm doing everything in my power to meet Londoners' housing needs. Through my Right to Buyback programme, I've enabled councils to purchase 1,294 homes for conversion to social rented council housing or temporary accommodation. Earlier this year, I confirmed that I've hit the ambitious target the government set of 116,000 new affordable homes under the 2016 to 23 Affordable Homes Grant, and I've led a renaissance of council home building, working with boroughs to smash my target of building 20,000 council homes, achieving the highest number since the 1970s. However, London needs more genuinely affordable homes, and I continue to call on the government to ensure this city has the funds and resources to meet our housing needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Now, I've tabled this question again because the last time I asked a written question about this, you didn't really say whether or not you were committed to ending right to buy. And I agree with a lot of what you've just said there, but you have to admit that this policy is actually a drag on all those council homes that you're completing, that the councils are completing. Under your grant schemes, the numbers completed so far since you took over as mayor is outstripped by the number of right to buy sales. So can you be clear with me that you're for getting rid of the right to buy policy? The last Labour government didn't do this, but I'm hoping that you'll be campaigning on the next government to get them to do that policy, get rid of it.
Yeah, so one of the things I want to do is to persuade, if not this government, then the next government to devolve to me those powers. And one of the things I'd be looking into, for the reasons you've set out, is to suspend right to buy for the reasons that you and I both agree with. Other things I'd be looking into, in addition to suspending right to buy to keep the remaining council stock, could be to reduce the discounts. It could be to ensure there's more flexibility in relation to the monies coming in. But you're right, one of the things that we've got to be looking into is suspending right to buy, because even in the most recent years, we're not catching up in relation to those that have been sold off and not replaced. On average, since 1979, it's 6 to 1. Some years, 15 to 1. So those sold off versus those replaced. Recently, we've managed to flip it, but it doesn't make up for the last 40 years. We may need to keep what we've got by suspending right to buy if those powers are devolved to London.
OK, great. I'm hoping you'll push that into the next Labour manifesto, because at the moment it's a debate within Labour. I'm out of time now, but thank you very much for that, and I'll speak to you again.
Thank you. I'm now going to pass over the chair to Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Mr. Mayor, the next question is the name of Assembly Member Bailey. Sorry, of Boff. I'm Boffer. And it's titled "The Fairer Scrap Screen." And that was it was really a slip of tongue. Sorry.
Thank you, Deputy.
Forward slip.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. The latest data shows that 9 out of 10 cars and around 8 out of 10 vans seen driving in outer London on an average day are already compliant with ULEZ standards. For non-compliant vehicles, I launched our £110 million scrappage scheme. Having listened to feedback from Londoners and colleagues, on the 1st of June, we announced an expansion to the scrappage scheme, meaning more Londoners than ever will be eligible for this financial support. The changes to the scheme include allowing all Londoners receiving child benefit to apply, as well as businesses registered in London with fewer than 50 employees. Charities operating in London will also be able to scrap up to 3 vans instead of just 1. My understanding is that if someone has arranged finance to purchase a vehicle, they may be able to request a settlement figure from their provider to assist them with the sale of their vehicle, but this will depend on the individual credit agreement with the lender. If it's a van or a minibus, they can take advantage of the new TfL retrofit scheme. With hundreds of thousands of vehicles now eligible to scrap their vehicles, TfL welcomes anyone who is interested in accessing the scheme to explore their options if the vehicle checker on the website tells them their vehicle is non-compliant. I've also asked TfL, in light of this question, to consider the contents on its website to ensure it provides helpful information to as many Londoners as possible, including those who may have purchased their non-compliant car on vehicle finance. While TfL has no way of knowing how many non-compliant vehicles have been purchased on vehicle finance, given the high levels of compliance and the fact that all petrol vehicles registered new from 2006 and diesel vehicles registered new from 2016 meet the standards, and lenders tend to lend the new vehicles, the number is expected to be small. TfL will continue to keep the scheme under review to ensure it's as effective as possible. We're using limited funding from City Hall to provide the scrappage scheme, and I continue to work with other cities to call on central government to create a targeted and national scrappage scheme to help more businesses and individuals to replace their older, more polluting vehicles. Last week, the government announced £11 million of funding, but not for London. It was for Bristol as part of a package of scrappage for £42 million. We've not received a penny of support from the government so far.
Mr. Mayor, Kieran Flynn is a landscape gardener based in Elthorne Park in Ealing. He took out finance on a van in January 2022, at a time when your statements indicated that you had no intention of expanding the ULEZ. So he took out this finance agreement, and he's now left in the situation where if he was to sell his van privately, he would get around £5,000. But all of that money would go towards paying off the finance, which currently stands about £7,000. It's clearly not enough either to buy a ULEZ compliant van or pay off the finance. If he was were to go with the scrappage scheme, he could be entitled to £7,500. If he was to get that, that would pay off the finance and leave him with virtually nothing to get a new vehicle. So even after getting the scrappage scheme grant, he would still be left without a van, and that is his livelihood. He's of the view that if this goes through, he's simply been put out of business. He will not be able to continue. What can you do for Mr. Flynn?
I'd suggest he gets the van retrofitted. We've now got a new scheme, which we didn't have before, which is to retrofit vans and minibuses, and I think Kieran could benefit from that. I'm very happy to get my office to look into Kieran's case if it helps your constituent, but a lot of people like him are retrofitting, and we've even delayed the grace period for those if there's a backlog in the company, which are clearly quite busy.
He has already. I've taken this up on his behalf with your office, and they provided no help whatsoever. Do you think this time, with you behind it, you could provide Mr. Flynn with some help?
Well, I'm not sure about what help you've asked for, but I've suggested the retrofit option, which you didn't mention in your question or your supplementary. So I'm happy to look into this case to see if Kieran can get his van retrofitted so he can stay in business.
Mr. Mayor, the changes in the scrappage scheme are only happening at the end of July, just a month before the start date. Why is this? Why is it just a month before? Is it that perhaps Capita can't cope with the workload?
So the retrofit scheme was announced in January 2023, not June 2023. The additional expansion of eligibility is because we've been listening to some of the issues raised across London. So that's not a Capita issue. That's to ensure even more Londoners are eligible for the scrappage scheme. We try to get the fairest scheme possible to help the largest number of people as possible. So the June announcement that you referred to is for those who receive child benefit are all eligible. That's more than 875,000 families across our city, 575,000 families in outer London. Those businesses that employ up to 50 people, that's 99% of businesses in London are now eligible. But also charities can retrofit or scrap not just one vehicle, but three. That doesn't affect Capita. That's to do with widening the eligibility because of me listening to issues raised by Londoners.
How do elderly people benefit from the changes?
Well, they may be people who take advantage of community centres who've got vans that pick them up, collect them, take them back home. I know near me, the First Down project on Moyser Road often picks up and collects older people.
Elderly people who have a vehicle?
Yeah. Well, they can benefit through a number of other routes. We've announced the disability scheme, we've announced the benefit scheme, so a lot of older people receive benefits. They're eligible for support in the scrappage scheme through their benefits. Most older people actually have compliant vehicles, and so I'd encourage them, if they haven't got access to the internet, to go to a local library or to ring up TfL to see if their vehicle is compliant. More than 9 out of 10 vehicles driving in outer London that are cars are compliant, and so older people should be okay, hopefully. If they're not, get in touch with the TfL, and there are various schemes on offer to support those older people.
Mr. Mayor, these changes have come in rather late, and how on earth do the 50% of vans registered in Outer London which are believed to be non-compliant get their scrappage sorted in 1 month?
Well, the vans registered in London, a lot of them could be from fleets where the headquarters are in London and the vans aren't driven in London. So if you work for a company that has a fleet registered as its headquarters in London, that vehicle's probably not being driven in London. It could be driven around the country. So there's less of a sense of urgency for those vehicles unless they're coming to London. As far as the vans are concerned, we've had a good take-up. We expect there to always be an increase as the scheme approaches. That was the experience from the last two schemes, Central London and the expansion. The team are ready to cope with that demand. The grace period we've announced is to enable those who have booked in for a retrofit or ordered a new vehicle, but it doesn't arrive by August 29th. There's a grace period of 6 months to support those companies and those with vans.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Pigeon wants to come in on the back of this question, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. In terms of a fairer scrappage scheme, you recently widened the scope of your scrappage scheme, partly because only a quarter of your funds have been allocated, despite the ULEZ expansion being weeks away. One of the issues I have picked up is that the amount of support on offer is not enough, particularly when the price of ULEZ compliant cars has increased since you announced the expansion. Have you considered whether you could increase the sum on offer to help Londoners clean up their vehicles and make the scheme fairer?
So a number of options are always looked into, and the scheme's always kept under review, and we monitor this. The take-up is where we expected it to be at this stage. Our experience from the last two schemes is actually, it's like a hockey stick. It starts initially a big interest when the announcement's made, goes down, then it increases a lot as the scheme approaches. And so, we think that there's enough money there to support people. We think the amount is right, bearing in mind to be ULEZ compliant. It doesn't need to be a brand new electric van, minibus or a car. But these things are always kept under review and monitored and stuff, including suggestions from you and other colleagues are always taken on board.
Thank you. And similarly, some residents still fall through the cracks of the system. I've been contacted by a resident who is in a simple partnership with his wife. He therefore isn't registered with Companies House. He doesn't earn enough to pay VAT. He cannot apply as a sole trader or as a micro business. Will you consider widening the scope to help small businesses such as this one to clean up their vehicles? I'm
more than happy, as I did with the chair, to speak to you offline to see how we can help your constituent who, in your words, seems to have fallen through the cracks.
Yeah, lovely. That's really helpful, because some of these sort of small changes could make a big difference to allowing people to access your scheme. You've stated quite rightly many times that you are trying to help Londoners who are struggling in this cost of living crisis. Will you consider using some of your reserves to double the scrappage scheme to help all outer Londoners to clean up their vehicles?
So you'll recall, in relation to the scrappage scheme for Central London and Inner London, we did monitor that, keep that under review, and increased it. I think the first may have begun at 25 million, and then ended at 61 million. So we always keep these things under review and monitor how things are going. The current trajectory is incredibly positive in relation to the number of vehicles that are compliant, the number of vehicles that are non-compliant, and the take-up of the scrappage. We've widened the eligibility to ensure more people can apply for the scheme, but we keep these things under review. I'd be a bit cautious about spending monies that you may think are just sitting there in reserves. A lot of that money is earmarked for other issues. We, for example, have given a facility to TfL of £500 million, which they've not taken up yet, and there are other things in relation to reserves we have. So we've got to be a bit careful about assuming that there's money available when there may not be.
Okay, I think widening it to all Londoners or more Londoners would be welcome. Finally, the 29th of August is fast approaching. And despite all of the publicity around ULEZ expansion, many people will still be caught unaware. Will you agree to send warning letters for the first few weeks rather than immediate fines to help Londoners to adjust to your new ULEZ boundary?
Chair, the member will appreciate why we wouldn't telegraph, even if we were considering doing something like that for obvious reasons. It just delays people taken action. Look, we're quite clear. We want to stick with August the 29th. We've given grace periods and extensions for those who may have challenges, as I've set out in the announcement in June. But these things are always kept under review and monitored.
I think in the past you have done that with a number of expansions. I think it would be welcomed by Londoners so that they're then aware before having to actually then pay a fine. If you want to bring the public with you, will you consider that?
All these things are monitored and kept under review.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm indebted to Assembly Member Dr Sahota for enabling me to ask a question, which is quite difficult. Occasionally it's quite difficult. Next we move to Assembly Member Pakari, who's got a question on the pollution levels in London.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. Filthy air is one of the greatest threats to our capital, with thousands of Londoners dying prematurely every year because of air pollution. The recently published Imperial College Review of Health Impacts highlights the harm that toxic air causes throughout the life course, prenatally through to old age, further highlighting the need for urgent action. Thankfully, London has made significant progress on reducing levels of toxic pollution since 2016. The latest analysis of air quality monitoring data shows that between 2017 and October 2022, nitrogen dioxide concentrations have reduced by a huge 56% in central London roadside locations. This is thanks to bold policies like the ULEZ, which has reduced nitrogen dioxide concentrations by 46% at roadsides in central London and 21% in inner London. The rate of reduction in NOx emissions from road transport more than doubled between 2016 and 2019 compared to between 2013 and 2016. Initial analysis from City Hall indicates that between 2016 and 2022, roadside nitrogen dioxide reduced by an average of 46% in London compared to an average of 37% UK-wide. This demonstrates the impact of the ULEZ. Thanks to this and the wider action we've taken, such as cleaning up the bus and taxi fleet and accelerating the switch to electric vehicles, the latest assessment now shows that we're on track to meet legal compliance for nitrogen dioxide by 2025. That's 190 years sooner than experts at King's College London say we would have got there without our policies. However, we still have a long way to go. Last week, a high pollution alert was issued for 2 consecutive days, and data shows that nowhere in London will meet the WHO guidelines in 2025 or even by 2030 unless we do more. That's why it's essential to expand the ULEZ to outer London. This is urgent right now. London's toxic air is leading to children growing up with stunted lungs and causes around 4,000 premature deaths a year, with the greatest number of attributable deaths in London's outer boroughs. I've committed to London meeting the target for PM2.5 of 10 micrograms per metre cubed by 2030, a whole decade before the government's new legal deadline. Our data shows this is possible. I'll continue to make the case to government to do the same and to provide me with the funding and powers necessary to tackle all sources of emissions, including from non-transport sources.
Thank you. I actually want to talk a little bit about river pollution. The Environment Agency revealed that a total of 31 London waterways saw 1,809 discharges. Sewage was pumped into London's rivers for over 7,000 hours last year. My FOI to the Environment Agency last year revealed that it took action over pollution in London's rivers on only 8 occasions between 2017 and 2021, and just 2 of those were prosecutions and only 1 against Thames Water. Now, leaving aside the super sewer for the Thames, what meetings have you had with the Environment Agency and the government specifically tackling sewage in London's rivers?
I've met frequently with Ofwat, and colleagues meet with the Environment Agency and Thames Water. There are 41 rivers in London, according to the briefing I have. Of those, the member's right, only 1 is good, 32 are moderate, 3 are bad, and 5 are poor. And sewage is one of the issues I've raised with Ofwat, and it's included in the turnaround plan we managed to lobby them to get Thames Water to work on. It is a serious issue. The responsibility lies with the Environment Agency, including monitoring and regulation, and the Deputy Mayor and myself will continue to raise this issue with not just Thames Water and Ofwat, but also the Environment Agency as well.
Now, in July 2020, but you made a commitment to reduce pollution incidents by 30% by 2025. So what did you mean by pollution incidents, and what progress have you made towards your own target of 30% reduction?
Quite a lot of the pollution in rivers is caused by what's called road runoff. And so what we've done is to take action to reduce the amount of road runoff pollution and damage to local rivers. That includes funding programs like the 2021 Grow Back Greener Fund, which improves water quality but also reduces water entry in our sewers. It's co-funded by Thames Water, which has awarded £1.4 million to 45 community projects. I'm assuming the question relates just to the water pollution. I can go through a whole host of policies we're doing in relation to pollution across the city, from road transport, wood burning, commercial cooking, the river, as well as that those from outside the city, like industry and agriculture.
But can we just talk about the specific target of 30% reduction? Do you think that you can reach that target? How are you going to achieve that specific 30% reduction with the powers that you have?
Well, I've explained some of the policies we're doing in relation to road transport. We've also got policies in relation to planning. So the London Plan has various policies in there which supports cleaning up pollution across our city. Working with boroughs in relation to pollution arising from, for example, wood burning, even though we've got no direct powers, using our convenient powers. Funding schools in relation to filtration systems, primary schools in particular. We've also got an air quality toolkit which is helping as well. But also some of the policies in relation to retrofitting will help as well.
Yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying, that there's some really commendable things happening, but you said that you had a target of 30% reduction on pollution incidents. Are you going to include river pollution within those incidents in that 30% reduction? And are you considering pressuring the government to devolve powers to grant you greater authority to tackle sewage dumping in London's rivers?
Yeah, so we've not lobbied directly for those powers. We've lobbied powers in other areas to do with combined heat and power, to do with non-road mobile machinery, to do with the boiler scrappage scheme, to do with wood-burning stoves, and to do with bringing forward the WHO target. We're going to be a bit careful in relation to powers because they require statute, and we know there are challenges in relation to government time before the general election. What we are doing is using our convenient power to lobby both Thames Water and Ofwat, and also lobbying the Environment Agency as well, so far without success.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask that one question again. Will you tackle sewage dumping and ask the government to devolve powers to you specifically on that area? And I'm not talking about wood burning right now, even though it's one of my favourite subjects, specifically sewage dumping.
We continue to lobby the government to do more in this area, whether it's the Environment Agency, whether it's Thames Water, whether it's Ofwat. I think we're going to be a bit careful about asking for powers when there's no resources there. There's no point having a power if there's no resources. Wood burning being a good example. Council's given more powers but no resources for the enforcement. And so, we want powers and resources, and the whole devolution ask is for not just London but other parts of the country to have more powers and resources.
And do you agree that we need to prioritise dumping of sewage in rivers?
Oh, it's a big issue. I mean, there are Labour candidates around the country who've got issues of sewage dumpage, not just in London, but across the country because of inaction from the government. And I'm afraid leaving the European Union makes it more difficult, not easier, to take action on this issue because you've not got the support of the directive from the EU, which was really useful. We've now lost that.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Garrett, and it concerns ULEZ and the Mayor's Manifesto.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. In May 2021, I won a mandate to serve as Mayor of London for a second term. During my first term and throughout my election campaign, I was clear that were I to be re-elected, I would remain committed to tackling the climate emergency and dealing with the blight of air pollution. I was clear in my manifesto that I'd expand the ULEZ up to the North and South Circular roads in October 2021. This was opposed by my main opponent at the time. I was also clear when I said, beyond the expansion of ULEZ, I'll monitor all existing road charging schemes to ensure they continue to bring the maximum benefits of improved air quality and reduced congestion. Despite dramatic improvements in London's air quality since 2016, pollution in outer London is not reducing at the same rapid speed as in central and inner London. And the greatest number of premature deaths attributable to air pollution are in London's outer boroughs, which the ULEZ doesn't currently cover. All Londoners, regardless of where they live, should be able to breathe clean air. In the context of this evidence, I've kept the ULEZ under review, as I said I would do in my manifesto. I believe it's vital that we expand the zone to cover the 5 million Londoners who are currently missing out on clean air, the benefits the ULEZ brings, just because they live in outer London. I made the decision to proceed with the expansion of ULEZ London-wide after careful consideration. It was a tough decision for me to make, but I believe it's the right one. I make no apology for taking bold and decisive action, which I have a mandate from the people of London to deliver. The current and long-term threat from toxic air pollution to public health is significant, and I cannot sit idly by when it is within my power to act. Compliance levels in London are already now high, with 9 out of 10 cars seen driving in outer London already meeting the standards, so the vast majority of drivers will not be affected by the change. The emissions represented by the remaining older, more polluting vehicles are still significant. This means we still need to take action to encourage people to switch to cleaner vehicles and/or greener forms of transport. Leadership means sometimes making tough decisions. I've been clear this was not an easy decision, but a necessary one due to the impact of air pollution on people's health.
But London-wide ULEZ wasn't in your manifesto. It wasn't something that you spoke about or tweeted about during your re-election campaign. And it's evident, even some of your own party colleagues agree, that it is coming in very quickly. To my mind, you're rushing it through before the next election. Isn't it pretty obvious that you just don't want the electorate to have a say on London-wide ULEZ?
Universal free school meals wasn't in my manifesto. Having 100,000 young people with mentors wasn't in my manifesto. Reforming the police service wasn't in my manifesto. Actually, cleaning up the air was. So if the member's suggesting a mayor shouldn't act on anything that's not in the manifesto, if the Tories won, God help us.
I'm suggesting that if you're making a policy on that scale, I mean, to be fair, it's very hard to find anything like the controversy on some of those other issues. It's pretty obvious that a lot of people are not happy about ULEZ. Is it not? Why is it that you're rushing it through before the election? Why don't you give people more time to adapt, as you did when you expanded it the previous time?
But is that right? I mean, police reform led to me being summoned by the Police and Crime Committee on 2 occasions. Police reform, not in my
Well, I think
manifesto.
that was your constructive dismissal of the previous commissioner that led to you being before the Police and Crime Committee.
You see, not in my manifesto. So here's the point.
Well, you're right. I mean, dismissing. But is it not obvious that you just simply don't want the public to have a say on the ULEZ expansion? That's why it wasn't there last time, and you're trying to get it through before they get a chance to say next May.
Well, I've given examples, Chair, of
You've
big
talked about
things.
other things. Specifically on this, is it not obvious that you just don't want people to have their say?
Well, my manifesto is quite clear. Beyond the expansion of ULEZ, I will monitor all existing road charging schemes to ensure they continue to bring the maximum benefits of improved air quality and reduced congestion. Since then, we have been reviewing it, and it's quite clear those in outer London aren't benefiting to the same amount those are in central and in London. But also, the review is required because the WHO is now saying that we aren't within the limits that they advise. Any level of air pollution is dangerous.
You're answering a different question now. I think it's quite clear, Chair, that the Mayor simply does not want Londoners to have a say on ULEZ expansion. I will leave it there.
Hear, hear. Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly... Oh, I beg your pardon. Assembly Member Duval.
Sorry, did I seem to miss something? That there was a consultation exercise that you undertook that you have to do statutorily. Is that what the Tories don't... Because they don't like the results of the consultation as well.
Well, here's
Where
the thing.
are they on that? Where are they on that? Where are they on that, Mr.
I think the results of the consultation were very clear, Assemblymember Duval.
Sorry, Chair, very clear if you get the letters that I got from people in Orkney and Shetland Isles and everywhere else outside London. Very clear, very clear. Mr. Mayor, would you reply?
It just goes to show why this party isn't fit to win the next mayoralty. Because what we didn't do is have a referendum on any issue, because I've got a mandate from Londoners to keep under review issues around air quality and to take bold action where necessary. But if they had their way, it's just worth reminding ourselves what's just been said. No reform of the police service. No reform of the police service, because not in the manifesto. No universal free school meals, because not in the manifesto. 100,000 young Londoners missing out on a mentor, because not in a manifesto. They may make a lot of noise now. They were silent when talking about law breaking from one of their own. And that's why, Londoners are losing trust and confidence in that party.
Thank you.
Any more? All right. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Moema concerning the Renters Reform Bill.
Chair, can I thank you for this question? Many Londoners are really concerned about this issue as well. I was pleased to see the Renters Reform Bill finally introduced in Parliament last month. I particularly welcome the proposed ending of Section 21 no-fault evictions, the introduction of open-ended tenancies for private renters, and the property portal, all of which I called for in my 2019 London model of tenancy reform. I am, though, disappointed that it's taken 5 years for the government to just publish the bill. It isn't yet legislation. It's also disappointing that the bill misses an opportunity to improve the affordability during the cost of living crisis, which has seen asking rents in London increase dramatically in the past year. That's why I'll continue to call on the government to make rents more affordable for Londoners by realigning the London Housing Alliance with median rent levels, scrapping the benefit cap, and giving me the power to implement a 2-year rent freeze and introduce a system of rent control. I was also disappointed that the Decent Home Standard was not included in the bill, as this would have helped deliver higher standards and improve property conditions for the sector. It's grossly unfair that the government expects private renters to endure lower housing standards than any other tenures. I am pleased that the government is seeking to tackle rogue landlords by including their details in the property portal, modelled on my rogue landlord and agent checker, alongside a new mandatory registration scheme. However, I'm disappointed that the bill fails to include provisions to enhance the enforcement powers of councils. My team's working with DLUC and boroughs to understand what these additional powers might look like. The bill makes provision for councils to use the powers they already have to enforce against breaches of the new legislation, but it's imperative they have the resources necessary to do this. Finally, the bill does not deliver on the promised ban on no children practices by some landlords and lane agents, nor on no DSS practices where people on benefits are refused access to housing. I urge the government to bring forward clauses with these additional protections at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. I echo the points that you've raised about the lost opportunities around bans on refusing to rent to people who are in receipt of benefits. When we think about the way that the housing market here works in London, obviously local authorities who can't afford much of their own stock because of the woeful levels of local housing allowance, when they discharge into the private rented sector, there is literally nowhere to go. And that is, I think, more than a missed opportunity. It's willful neglect of hundreds of thousands of Londoners in particular. And I just wanted to ask you, though, so in the last year or so, we've seen rent increases of about 15% in the private rented sector, and obviously that's variable across the capital. Just today, we're expecting an increase in interest rates and the baseline rate to 4.25%. And so obviously landlords, who are after all a really important part of our ecosystem in providing homes to people, they have suffered and will continue to suffer eye-watering increases. But those increases, when we think about what private tenants are dealing with, the extra increases in rent will go a massive way to making life that much more difficult for people and generate more homelessness. And so I just wonder what your thoughts are on how the government could be supporting either those with mortgages and buy-to-let landlords, but also make sure that there are protections for tenants in the sector who are really worried from today, if not more before.
Thanks for the explanation, and your questions. The reason why we've got to take action and the question. Look, I think the government had a chance to deal with 3 big issues in this area. 1 is security of tenure, 2 is conditions, and 3 is affordability. Yes, I welcome the progress they've made, but this is the one bill for the foreseeable future dealing with these issues, and that's why I'll be lobbying them. I'm sure you'll be to make these additional changes they need to improve the bill in relation to the points you've raised. But I think the summit tomorrow is really important. To give the Chancellor credit, is calling the mortgage companies. But you could ask them to do a number of things to support these landlords. Many landlords are decent, by the way. For them, it's their pension often. But they need support if they, just manage to get the mortgage, the buy-to-let mortgage, and so forth. And passing on to the tenants means potentially that those tenants becoming homeless, which, by the way, adds to the tax bill later on, helping homeless people and/or rough sleepers. So, I've written to them with ideas. I know separately, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has written to them as well I'm not worried about them nicking my ideas or whatever. We're not precious about this because we want tenants to be helped and those with mortgages as well. And I'm hoping sanity prevails because I worry this sort of reality test about we can't interfere with the market for reasons X, Y, Z is not the way to approach it because there are people suffering. And I don't think people being made homeless is a price worth paying. I don't think a recession is a price worth paying. I don't think unemployment of 3.5 million is a price worth paying. So I'm hoping saner heads prevail.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I just wanted to also pick up on something that was, again, missed in the bill, which I think would be really beneficial to bringing standards to the private rented sector, and that's around the decent home standard, where we've heard the ongoing reports about damp and mould in the social sector, but at least there tenants do have some recourse and some way to hold their landlords to account. That does not exist in the private rented sector. We heard at the last plenary the absolutely atrocious measures to remove any protections for migrants who might be moving to the private rented sector to essentially allow slum landlords. And I just wonder whether or not we will be, or you will be, working to lobby the government to extend that to private tenants.
Yeah, but the point you raise is so important. People may not realise who aren't renting privately. The reason why tenants are nervous raising this issue with landlords is because you can evict for no reason. Landlord sees you as a troublemaker and they evict you. That's why we welcome Section 21 going, the no-fault eviction. But the problem is, you sticking your head above the parapet making a noise may give the landlord a reason to use the other reasons they can still evict. They want to move back in the property, they're going to say they're going to sell it, and they could use that as an excuse to get rid of you and stuff. So I think it's really important that the government understands they may think they've solved this problem, but they haven't. There's got to be proper standards in place. There's got to be a better way of arbitrating on the standards, a proper way of enforcing. And local authorities, you will know this from the great work you do in East London, local authorities have the resources to have the officers who are trained up to the enforcement and so forth. And so I think the government's got an opportunity now to really address this issue and fix it. Because the housing campaign, as you and I regularly meet, are pleased with the progress in the bill published, not passed, published, but we can improve it over the next few weeks and months to make it a much, much better bill. And I'm hoping that Michael Gove, who I've got a lot of respect for, will listen to the power of the evidence and make the changes and accept the changes.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Baker and concerns the ULEZ scrappage eligibility.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this question. With toxic care leading to around 4,000 Londoners dying prematurely each year, children growing up with stunted lungs and a higher risk of conditions including stroke, dementia and cancer, and in older people, it's essential that the ULEZ, which has already shown to be hugely effective in cleaning up the air in central and inner London, is expanded London-wide. 9 out of 10 cars seen driving in outer London and 95% in inner London are already compliant with ULEZ standards. To help the remaining Londoners to adapt to the expansion, I funded TfL to deliver a £110 million vehicle scrappage scheme. The scheme was launched to businesses, charities, low-income and disabled Londoners on the 30th of January. By the end of May, almost 7,000 applications had been approved and over £25 million committed to supporting Londoners in replacing the capital's most polluting vehicles. Since then, I've listened to feedback, and on the 1st of June, I announced a major expansion of the scrappage scheme, meaning even more Londoners are now eligible for financial support to replace non-compliant vehicles from July. The changes to the scheme include allowing all Londoners receiving child benefit to apply. There are over 850,000 families in receipt of child benefit in our city, with over 550,000 in outer London. All businesses registered in London with fewer than 50,000 employees will be able to apply, increased from the businesses with up to 10 staff, and this will open the scheme to around 35,000 additional small businesses. And charities operating in London will be able to scrap up to 3 vans instead of just 1. I've also asked TfL to actively monitor applications from our city's care workers to ensure they're benefiting from the money available. Expanding the ULEZ London-wide was not a decision I made lightly, but with the triple challenges of toxic air, climate change and congestion faced by our capital, the cost of inaction is simply far too high a price to pay. The ULEZ has been proven to work, already reducing harmful nitrogen dioxide pollution by nearly half in central London and a fifth in inner London, and our policies will mean 5 million more Londoners breathing cleaner air.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's really helpful, and I really welcome the extension of eligibility. And I do also note that you've said a couple of times that you're continuing to keep it the scheme under review, because we are getting or hearing circumstances where there are people who are falling through the cracks at the moment. We are also obviously still in the situation, however, where the government has not committed to support our clean air zone as they have elsewhere. So I suppose the question is, if there was further funding that could be given, that was given by government, where would you target that? What other groups would you like to support with the scrappage scheme if we had more money available?
Can I make this clear? Whether it's you, whether it's Andrew Boff, whether it's Caroline Pigeon, I accept fully you're raising sincerely concerns raised to you by constituents. I accept that, and I accept I've got to do even more to address those concerns, because there are still people approaching you, Andrew, Caroline and others with concerns. Not a penny of support from the government. Not a penny of support from the government. They've got targets for cities across the country. They've been found to be breaking the law. In answer to a question raised by Hina Bakari, yes, we'll be lawful by 2025. The target, the law, was 2010. So even though we'll be lawful by 2025 because of my policies, we're 15 years late. And so we're trying to lobby the government for more support, because I want every Londoner who's currently driving a non-compliant vehicle to be eligible for support. I can't do that, though, because I've not got any support from the government. I was really pleased when they announced £11 million last week, and I celebrated because I thought it was for me. I'm so happy because it's for Bristol people. I'm so happy for them. So the government are giving money. That comes to £42 million for Bristol. What about London? What about London? And, so we'll carry on lobbying them. By the way, working collegially with other mayors across the country who've been great. These mayors, these cities who've got money, feel grateful, but say, why not London? So we're working collegially to have a targeted national scrappage scheme, because I mentioned the figure of around 4,000 premature deaths in London. Government figures say up to 36,000 across the country. Not my figures, government figures across the country. So this is an issue for all of the country, not just London. But I do accept we've got to keep this under review. I do accept we've got to monitor that, and I'll continue to do so.
Thank you. So that is really welcome. I suppose. Just to say, so I was sort of looking to see, and absolutely, I think all Londoners who have a polluting car, the most polluting cars, should have eligibility for the scrappage. But obviously, money is not infinite, so we need to target it. And I think we all really welcome the extension for those who will receiving child benefit, because not only having those caring responsibilities for children that might sometimes necessitate car use, but also they often have caring responsibilities for older people. So there's a whole chunk of people who will really, really benefit for car use, private car use that they need. I also, the monitoring care worker applications, I think, I'm hoping is sort of a bit of a statement of intent, acknowledging that there's some people there who may need extra support. So I'm just wondering, are there people that you are sort of really keeping an eye on, groups of people that you're keeping an eye on, where you're going, we if we can find it, we'll try and help them?
Look, thank you for what you said. Look, if we're being honest, I mean, the role of the care worker came to the fore during the pandemic, when we saw them often poorly paid, using their own vehicle to go from home to home, domiciliary care. So we're working with the organisations that represent care workers to make sure they get the support that we've set aside for them. We were a bit concerned about the take-up not being as high as we thought it'd be. That could be because their cars are compliant. It could be because they're not aware. It could be there's not enough support they're receiving. So we are targeting laser-like, because it's difficult to go to each individual care worker, but those that represent them and umbrella groups, because we want to make sure they get support. Often, by the way, they don't get paid when they're going from home to home. No. And so, even more reason to support them financially in relation to having a compliant vehicle. And so we are targeting those groups, and we'll continue to keep this under review and monitor it as well.
Okay, thanks very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. And the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Hall, and on the next mayors of London's priorities.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. I'm proud that we've been working to meet Londoners' priorities since I came to office in 2016. On crime, we've invested a record £1 billion to plug the gap left by austerity and put more than 1,300 additional police officers on our streets. And we're now recruiting for 500 more police community support officers. We've launched England's first ever violence reduction unit, which has already benefited over 150,000 Londoners. Since the VRU was established in 2019, there has been a 20% reduction in homicides, a 16% fall in knife injury of a person under 25, and a 26% reduction in robbery. And we've begun the process of rebuilding trust and confidence with the appointment of a reforming commissioner. On housing, we've started over 20,000 new council homes and hit the target set by government of starting over 116,000 affordable homes, despite the pandemic, Brexit and skyrocketing inflation. On the environment, we've brought in the world's first ultra-low emission zone, which has already halved the level of toxic air in central London and reduced it by 21% in inner London. We're funding universal free school meals for state primary school children in London, so our children get at least one good, healthy meal a day. We've supported over 110,000 young people with our £70 million Young Londoners Fund. Last year, we saw 200,000 people attend a free skills course thanks to decisions made from City Hall. We've put £44 million into our Academies programme to help Londoners into good jobs in health, social care, digital, the green economy and hospitality. My priorities as Mayor are Londoners' priorities. Londoners want somewhere affordable they can call home. They want to feel safe walking down the street. They want a reformed police service that commands their trust and confidence. They want access to green space. They want the opportunity to retrain if they need to prepare for the economy of tomorrow. And they want to breathe clean air. These have been my priorities over the past 7 years, and they'll be my priorities in the next 5. Now we have the additional need to ensure our city recovers strongly from the pandemic, achieving all we were working towards before COVID hit, and moving on to even better things. We've delivered a lot in the face of the worst government austerity Londoners can remember, but the job is not yet done. We need to build on what we've achieved.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning.
Good morning.
So the number one priority for the current and the next mayor is to keep Londoners safe. But in all honesty, it doesn't look as if that is your priority. Very soon we could be facing another crime wave. So I want to look at some of last year's crime figures, etc. The crime wave that you blamed on the weather, if you'll recall, last year. So if we start with looking at Saturday the 7th of May 2022, very sadly that was a bad day in London, and it was the start of the last year's crime wave. On that day, a teenage boy was stabbed on Tottenham High Road. A Harrow man was allegedly attacked and left with life-changing head injury. In Newham, somebody was shot with an air rifle in broad daylight on a high street. On Holloway Lane in Hillingdon, a motorcyclist was sadly killed in a hit-and-run accident. And in Romford Shopping Centre, a 13-year-old girl was allegedly sexually assaulted by 3 boys. So, a bad day in London. So, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, do you remember at that point what you did in response to any of those incidents?
Chair, so it's a question what I was doing on the 22nd of May 2022.
Yep.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure what I was
Let
doing.
me help you. You flew on a jolly to America to hang out with James Corden, watch baseball, stay in luxury hotels, and enjoy the smell of some cannabis plants, I believe, and to the cost to the taxpayer of $34,000. Do you remember that?
So, Chair, I do remember banging the drum for our city in the USA. As a consequence of the work we've done banging our drum, we've now got record numbers of tourists coming to London this year, including from America. I visited Barclay, the Grosvenor Hotel, Grosvenor Square, Grosvenor Marriott Hotel, Grosvenor Square last weekend, and I was told by the manager, we've got record numbers of guests from America. We're overbooked, and that's a consequence of your policies of promoting us to America. So I do remember not just the trip to America, but the consequence, and this weekend, by the way, we've got Major League Baseball taking place in our city. Many thousands of people from Europe will be coming to watch that baseball rather than going to America. And I'm also pleased this week we've got the premiere of a Hollywood movie filmed in London, which has brought money to jobs being created in London, but also money for people going to the cinema. Hospitality needs people going back. Strong economy means we can invest in public services.
Let's keep this on crime, Mr. Mayor. So during your week in America, a 16-year-old was stabbed on Willowbridge Road in Canonbury. A 55-year-old was allegedly hit over the head in a homophobic attack in Burgess Park, Camberwell. A teenager was shot in Brixton Hill with a shotgun. A 34-year-old was shot in Brockwell Park with a shotgun. A man was taken to hospital with serious head injuries after a fight on Shoreditch High Street. A woman in her 40s was stabbed in Croydon in front of school children. And I could go on and on. I'm trying to establish if London is safer with Sadiq, and clearly it's not. And this was the beginning of a serious crime wave. But your priority was to promote yourself going on holiday, was it not?
Well, Chair, let me unpack the various points raised in that question. Firstly, I'm sure all of us will have in our thoughts the victims of those crimes rather than them being used as political footballs in a mayor's question time. The second issue is in London, as a consequence of my investment, every budget which I've used to invest money in the police has been voted against by the Conservative group. But as a consequence of my investment in the police, we've bucked the national trend. 1,300 more police officers, 500 more PCSOs. So like in the rest of the country, you compare London versus 2016, knife crime with injury down by 5%, knife crime with injury, those below 25 down, gun crime down, homicide down, burglary down, over the last year robbery and teenage homicides down. Not complacent, so we're invested in the police. At the same time, we're invested in young people, giving them constructive things to do. Again, the budget to invest in the VRU, the budget to invest in Young Londoners Fund, voted against by the Conservative group. So I'll take no lectures from the party of austerity about fighting crime or supporting our great city.
Mr. Mayor, you only have to go to public meetings, and the prime concern is prime. The prime concern is that people don't feel safe. Women certainly don't feel safe on the road. At night in particular, nobody is feeling safe. And whenever we see you, it's just nothing but sound bites, surrounded by cannabis plants. And now, of course, we've got you doing a tour of selling your book. When people are suffering out there, particularly with regard to crime, nobody can get answers from police when they phone, and yet you don't seem to care about it. But if I step away from crime and look at another area, people are being forced into debt over closing their businesses over the ULEZ. We keep hearing about it, and the only reason my colleagues continue to bring this up is because our emails are full of issues around the ULEZ. I'm glad you're going to be looking into Mr. Flynn's situation for Assembly Member Boff, but every one of us could give you at least another dozen. I know of a gentleman who owns a hotel in Enfield. He has got 20 members of staff who actually do not have compliant cars. They're on minimum wages. He can't afford to pay them anymore. They can't afford to buy new cars. They are going to have to give up working for him. His family business will go under. We hear, don't we, colleagues? We hear this all the time, and you are just not listening. Are you listening now?
Chair, if the question was, am I listening now, the answer is yes.
Right. So why don't you do something about it? Why don't you help those hard-working Londoners who are absolutely desperate? They don't know what to do. Some of them know that they can't afford to go to work. They then don't know how they're going to pay their families. And you are just not listening.
So in relation to those affected by the expansion of the ULEZ, is because we've been listening that I announced the widening of eligibility in June. So as a consequence of me listening to those Londoners who have concerns, and by the way, this wasn't an easy decision. The easy thing to do was to do what the government does, which is to kick the can down the road. But we widened the eligibility, so now every single family in London that receives a child benefit, more than 850,000 families are now eligible for support under the Scrappage scheme. And in Outer London, that's more than 550,000 families. In relation to the businesses, the member mentioned a hotel business. Previously, only those businesses that employed less than 10 people would be eligible. Now those businesses that employ less than 50 people are eligible. That's more than 35,000 businesses, but also charities can now scrap or retrofit not one vehicle but 3 because we are listening. But also, who's speaking for those who are suffering the consequences of air pollution, the premature deaths? Those with stunted lungs, those adults with a whole host of health issues from asthma, dementia, cancer, heart disease, the doctors, the experts, and, you know, I'm listening to those too.
Mayor Khan, you are actually not listening to people's plights. You do not seem to understand how desperate some of these people are. When I was out campaigning in Uxbridge, it's the only thing that they were talking about on the doorstep, because some people are utterly desperate. A man called Paul Bates spoke to My London the other day. He's had to shut his construction business because of ULEZ. He used a pre-2015 diesel van and he would not have been able to pay his staff and cover his fees for their non-compliant vans. He says the scrappage scheme would not have saved his company. Now he's saying that he's not going to be able to go and see his 9-year-old daughter as often. He currently visits his daughter in Hythe on the south coast every week, and he's going to have to make that every 2 weeks. There are real people here suffering, really, really suffering, and you come up with other reasons for why you want to do this, but you're not listening to all these cases that we are. People in outer London are suffering because of what you are imposing on them.
So we are listening, which is why we announced the changes in the scrappage scheme. But I'm also listening to Londoners who are worried about interest rates going up. I'm also listening to Londoners worried about inflation, record levels. I'm also listening to Londoners worried about the cost of doing business. This week I had a reception in City Hall, invited businesses to City Hall. The number one concern they had was, as a consequence of government policies, the cost of doing business in London. So we're addressing the concerns we can address. But look, I accept expanding ULEZ wasn't an easy decision. It's not universally popular. The good news is, because of our policies, not only is the air getting cleaner, but in outer London, there are more and more compliant vehicles being driven and more people making alternative choices as well. And we'll carry on listening and addressing the genuine concerns that Londoners have.
Mr Mayor, when I look at what you've been doing and where you've been going, and then I look at the people that have been knifed or shot and everything else when you're out prioritising yourself, you're now gadding around selling your selling your book when there's crime all over the place. While you enjoy your perks, Londoners are paying the price. You are not listening to them. You do not seem to care. If you did, you would stop this ULEZ expansion. If not, you would certainly postpone it until people can afford to replace their vehicles. We need somebody who will listen to Londoners, because you, Mr Khan, are not.
Well, Chair, I wish...
Assembly Member, there must be some questions in there, if possible.
Chair, Sadiq Khan does not listen to a thing. London is not safer with Sadiq. London is much, much worse off. Londoners are in a much worse position because you are there and you are not listening. And from our point of view, it is not fair and it's not good enough. And that's what we're being told by our members and by members of the public to say to you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Chair. Thank you, Assembly Member. Can I remind Assembly members that you can have a passion for your cause, and you can speak, but there really must be a question in there, because this is what this meeting is about. Thank you very much.
Is that for me to respond now?
It is, sir.
Chair, it's obvious now why it's just obvious why most of the Assembly on the Tory side are supporting other candidates.
Well, that's not demonstrably true. It's not demonstrably true. Assembly Member Cooper, you wish to come in.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr Mayor, when you were originally looking at the package of adaptation and mitigation, which is very long for Londoners because we know we're asking people to make a significant change, retrofit was not included. You've been kind enough to describe me as someone who's chivied you, possibly badgered you, to make changes to various policies. I have mentioned retrofit on I don't know how many occasions. It is now included. Would you say that you listen to Londoners and listen to Assembly members who put forward necessary changes to the mitigations and adaptations for this scheme?
I mean, just to extend the credit, I mean, you were vociferous in your lobbying of me, as were colleagues in other parties as well, because in the first scheme we had, there was no retrofit. And the concerns you were raising, and colleagues from other parties as well, the Lib Dems and the Greens, was there was technology available to retrofit vans and minibuses, and the point you made to me and others from the Lib Dems and the Greens was, why don't you give finances to help these charities? I know you work closely with charities in Thursday, I've seen for myself, but across Merton and Wandsworth. Why don't you support them? So the scheme we announced this year did allow support financially for retrofit of those vehicles. Another point made in the last scheme is, I think it was made by the Lib Dems, is why don't you give credits to those who use public transport? Again, on a cross-party basis, you made the point as well. And again, we've listened, and this scheme does allow that as well. The Greens have raised other issues in relation to. Sorry, I'm trying to share the credit, but it's the memory muscle. But can I be clear? Listen, I understand people are under pressure. There are selections to be fought, selections to be won, and so I hope colleagues will reflect that actually we have listened. But to be fair, others have listened as well. So I remember in this chamber, the Conservatives opposing free school meals. The Conservatives opposing universal free school meals. And I discovered this week, I was told, Susan Hall now supports universal free school meals. The lady is for turning.
Assembly member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad that you've listened to Assembly members where we've spoken to you on behalf of our constituents. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly member Best.
No, there's a point of explanation for that rubbish coming out of the Mayor's mouth first.
Yeah. We have always supported free school meals, actually. Get your facts right, Mayor Khan. Get your facts right, just for once.
Assembly member Best.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, before that statement, I wanted to lead with the fact that I don't believe the Mayor that you are stupid, and I actually do think you are quite politically astute. So to pretend to Assembly member Garrett that you don't understand the difference between not putting universal free school meals in your manifesto and not putting a whole ULEZ expansion across the London, which is really going to hit people. To pretend you don't know the difference between those things is just ridiculous. People watching all at home will understand that. You understand that. Don't pretend you don't understand that. You absolutely do. So with that in mind, you can see why people are angry about the ULEZ. And this is something that I've had consistently put to me. They're angry because it wasn't in your manifesto. Now, if Assembly member Berry had won in that mayoral election, I think Londoners would actually not be as angry because she was clear about her position and Londoners understood that. So when it comes to the fact that in the Telegraph, you were saying the ultimate destination is smart reuser charging, can you please at least accept that you've understood from your mistakes which led people like Mr. Flynn, that Assembly member Boff raised earlier, to go and make decisions like buy a van that you were then going to charge a year later. Can you learn from the real human cost of this and make sure that if you do want to pursue road user charging, it is in your manifesto? Because let's be honest, the Greens will be upfront about it. Will you be upfront about it in your manifesto and tell people what they are voting for?
Well, Chair, let me just unpack the last 2 minutes and address the points raised in that question. So I was quite clear in my manifesto, beyond the expansion of ULEZ, I'll monitor all existing road charging schemes to ensure they continue to bring the maximum benefits of improved air quality and reduced congestion. One can infer from that actually, if they're not working as effectively in Outer London as we'd hope them to do so, if the WHO are advising on new standards that we should be looking into, if we know the boroughs with the largest number of premature deaths are in Outer London, but we also know there are things we can do about that, we should do about that. But the idea that you can't do things that aren't specifically stated in black and white in a manifesto is ridiculous, because if their thesis is right, we'd still have a police commission. That isn't
what we're stating, but you are looking at things that are going to be really difficult for people to come to terms with. And so if you know that, you should put them in your manifesto.
Chair, so I know from personal experience that losing confidence in the former commissioner was very controversial. Not in my manifesto. I knew reforming the police service was very controversial, is very controversial, not in my manifesto. I've had opposition on those big schemes from the Prime Minister, from the Home Secretary, from the Policing Minister, from the former head of HMI, from the former chair of the Police and Crime Committee. The idea, I'm not going to do it because it's not in my manifesto, is ridiculous. It's the right thing to do for London, and that's why I'm doing it.
So will you put road user charging, which you know you are considering, into your manifesto?
Chair, I welcome all support and contributions for my manifesto, even from the Tories. And
so
when it comes
will you put road user charging into your manifesto?
So let's be clear. The question at Mayor's Question Time, 11 months in advance of the election, is will I take the advice from the Tories in my manifesto? When it comes to writing my manifesto, I'll take on board advice from everybody, even including foe as well as friend.
So when it comes to people like Mr. Flynn, can you understand that if you had been upfront, he's not a mind reader. He would not have gone and bought that van if he'd have known you were bringing in the ULEZ expansion. You know you were looking at road user charging. So can you be upfront with people so there isn't as much human cost and there isn't as much anger? Because you're dancing around the issue, but you're not stupid, Mr. Mayor. Honestly, you understand that a policy where people are going to have to pay out their pocket, the more upfront you are about that, the more they can deal with what their personal circumstance and make sure they are ready for it. It's not really a political question. I just care about that human cost that we've spoken about today, and you know we can avoid it. So please, can you commit that you will put road user charging into your manifesto, or if you are not going to put it into your manifesto, that you will not do it to London?
Well, Chair, I think we're going around the houses on this one. So the Mayor's transport strategy...
The reason we're going around the houses is because it's a simple question you're not answering. Answer the question
Chair,
and we'll stop now.
Chair, you've got a chair. Come on. I know you're distracted, Chair, but you've got a chair.
Mayor, to answer.
Thank you. So there is a Mayor's transport strategy, and I'd encourage the member to take the trouble to read the Mayor's transport strategy, which sets out our policies in relation to road user charging and other issues. When it comes to my manifesto, I'll publish that in due course, nearer the election. I suspect you'll rule me out of order, Chair, if I start discussing Labour Party policy in relation to manifestos at this stage. I'm more than happy to have a conversation at Mayor's Question Time about my policies at the next election. I suggest that June 2023 is not the right time to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just finally follow up with the fact that Mr. Flynn actually isn't eligible for the retrofit scheme. So will you look to work with him to find a solution which can work?
Well, Chair, I'm really careful not to discuss casework in public. I've already offered you, Chair, to look into Mr. Flynn's case offline. I'm not sure what the purpose is of raising it publicly again.
To demonstrate that your proposal didn't work.
So the leader of the Tory group's finally found a backbone, just not when it comes to Sean Bailey. Sorry, did you say something, Neil? Yeah, there he goes.
I'm sorry.
Chair,
I'm sorry. Everything.
There was a question there, I thought.
Not now.
Not a backbone or a question,
Chair.
Chair.
Now. This is not Assembly members' question time. This is question time for the Mayor. The next. Have you finished, Assembly Member? Assembly Member Mo Emma.
My question is to you, Chair. So I don't know how it works with the timings, but I just wondered if we might remind members that backhanded comments saying 3 times, "Oh, I know you're not stupid." It's happened in other sessions where members of this side have had their intelligence or ability to understand what's before them. I just would really welcome from you, Chair, that we remind members that we should manage ourselves with decorum in the chamber.
Sorry, do you mean like how the Mayor was behaving? Because actually telling someone they're not stupid is a compliment. And I said the Mayor's
Assembly member,
It's a nice thing you've said to me in 2 years.
The question was put to the Chair, not to you,
Everybody
Assembly
stop.
Member Best.
Everybody stop.
Sorry, but
No, you two. Everybody stop. I've been asked a question. I did not see that as an insult. To say that somebody is not stupid is not an insult. If it was to say that somebody was stupid, I would intervene.
Chair, my point is it's a backhanded comment to repeat it 3 times to imply exactly the opposite. So I just would like to have members reminded that we should manage ourselves and our language with decorum.
I do support that, and I do support people treating other members with respect. I didn't see it on that occasion personally. Assembly Member.
Chair, can I just, because I believe I just want to be clear that my comment, well, you've said that I was insulting the Mayor. I want to be clear that I was saying he was an intelligent man, and that is something that I believe.
Yeah. Let's move on swiftly to the next person. Assembly Member Fortune, if you wouldn't mind.
Thanks very much. I'll bring this up whilst we're here. The part of the mitigation that's put in place for the expanded ULEZ zone is the Orbital Express network and the buses that will be on that route. Will those buses be electric or net zero?
I know you've got a question. Can I just...
Yeah, I'll jump on it now.
So the new buses on the Superloop, you mean the Superloop, don't you?
Yeah.
The new bus on the Superloop will be zero emission. We're currently procuring those with the operators and contractors, so I can't give you the numbers of new buses versus Euro 6 buses. I'm more than happy to get somebody from TfL to speak to you about that. I think there are a number of different companies we're doing business with, and so the guarantee I can give you is every single new bus will be zero emission.
Do you have any idea when they'll be delivered?
Again, it depends on how successful we are with the procurement. We're currently working on two things, just to give you an idea. One is the buses, which is easy. Two is the charging infrastructure on the garages. We're piloting two things which will interest you, one in Bromley, one in Bexley Heath, around charging. So I've got a proper answer here, but I'd have to read it. But I'm happy to do so if you want me to. I'm not sure if you're...
So I'll follow up and you can have a flick through, because I think you mentioned earlier about the Mayor's transport strategy. I read it, because that's how I roll. In 2018, it first talked about an Orbital Express network, page 158, if you want to go and look for it, in the Mayor's Transport Strategy 2018. So that's sort of 5 years where this could have been sort of put in place. So why is it? It just feels a bit like the consultation and the procurement is all being a bit rushed.
That's a fair question. So let me explain. So back then, not all our buses were Euro 6. So back then, when I became mayor, all our buses were diesel. We had about a few single-decker that were zero emission, that were piloted. So we've gone from zero Euro 6, maybe about less than 10, to now all 9,000 are Euro 6. That's meant we've reduced nitrogen dioxide by 9%, particularly matter by 8%. But the next phase is going to zero emission, for obvious reasons you said. The problem has come with a number of things. Firstly is lack of capital. We had to freeze everything for 2 years during the pandemic for reasons that you know. So we have to restart some of that work taking place as well, and then after the pandemic to do the deal with the government. So what we're doing now is these contracts are 7 years long. We're trying to get to zero emission. At the moment, we're programmed to get there by 2034. We're talking to the government to get to, this is across all of London.
Okay.
We're aiming to get there by 2030 with government support. To give you an idea of the scale of the challenge, we've got the biggest bus fleet in Europe and the second biggest in the world. And so for all our buses to be zero emission, it will take 2034.
So I don't want to drift into that area because that's all buses, and I absolutely recognise that's a bigger challenge. This was specifically mentioned in the MTS in 2018, and this is part of the mitigation for the expanded ULEZ. So it was kind of, it would be axiomatic, wouldn't it, that the thought process would be that these would be clean buses.
Yeah, they are.
So the new ones will be clean,
yeah.
But so the ones that will be moving out or on that system, on that network, will be compliant as opposed to...
Well, no, Euro 6 is clean. Euro 6 is clean. Let's be clear, they're clean.
Right,
you got to Putney High Street now. It's very different how it was in 2016.
All right. So then, when it comes to that whole system being covered, because there are 10 routes, aren't there, I think? And there's seven complete routes. We haven't got a date for when they'll all be electric or net zero. Because you're going through the procurement process.
Every single new route, so there's 4 currently, every single new route will be completely zero emission, because they're new buses, right?
Yeah, and they're going to be ready in August.
Not all of them start in August. Some start earlier, some start later. I can send you the timeline. So we're consulting on 3 separate ones now. And so they start at different phases. And so that's why I said to you that the different bus routes have different bus operators, potentially.
Yeah.
But every single new bus that goes on the Superloop will be zero emission. But because we've gone from... Because now all our buses are cleaner, Euro 6, every single bus on the Superloop, the current X buses, are Euro 6, and so 90% less nitrogen dioxide, 8% less particulate matter.
Okay. Remind me when that consultation will close?
There's a few different ones depending on each route, and so each route has its own consultation because of different. So
when will it all be finished? Because it's a connected network by definition, isn't it? So.
Sometime in summer, but I continue. But I've seen the exact date. But there are different routes of different consultation date ends.
So I'll come back because I think I'd like a further chat about this because, like I say, it's been 5 years building up to it, so it feels like there's a bit of pressure right at the end of this process, and so I'd like to look at the procurement again. But
five years ago there wasn't the Superloop, the idea of the 10 buses and so forth.
The Express network was in your MTS.
Yeah, but not the ambition. Isn't what it is now.
Yeah.
The ambition now is far greater.
Yeah, it talks about the same thing. It talks about linking up outside of London. It talks about missing certain stops. And it talks specifically about the fact that there's not rail connectivity. That's It's off the top of my head, but I think it's about...
Sure. And it's the pantograph charging infrastructure, the 132 in Bexley Heath and 358 in Bromley. I found it.
Right. Okay. All right. I'll leave that there. But thank you.
Everything on that question. Therefore, I propose that we take a 10-minute comfort break back here at 11:46. Thank you. Oh.
Broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
break on the NQ2.
We haven't lost one, have we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah, we're there.
Right, let me just get on to the next question, which is Assembly Member Rogers. Is Assembly Member Rogers in place? Thank you very much. After that break, I didn't realise that the responsibilities of the chair of the London Assembly was to also find handkerchiefs, but you know that's another issue. If we can move to the next question, which is in the name of Assembly Member Rogers, and it concerns literacy in London.
Thank you, Chair. A good level of basic English is critical to improving the life chances of many Londoners, allowing them to access good work, engage with their communities, and make the most of the opportunities London has to offer. The £320 million per year adult education budget is the key lever I have for supporting Londoners to improve their basic literacy skills. Since taking control of the adult education budget, we've overseen a 32% increase in English course enrolments compared to when the government managed this funding. Prior to the AEB delegation, adult participation in basic English and maths courses in London had fallen by 29% between 2011 and 2016. In 2020-2021, we made a 10% increase towards the average cost per AEB-funded enrolment for English and maths qualifications at levels 1 and 2. This may be the first mayor to introduce a funding uplift for English courses to help AEB providers manage rising costs of delivery and increase learner participation. We increased the funding uplift to 13.5% for 22-23. This investment has supported over 80,000 learners to enrol on English courses since the AEB was delegated to me, including around 65,000 learners who accessed courses through the English entitlement. I'm pleased to see other regions now emulating this funding uplift. Improving access to English language provision for speakers of other languages is also vital to improving literacy levels and social integration in our communities. Through the AEB, I fund the provision of English language courses for those for whom English isn't their first language, and I've worked to make this more accessible. This past year, we've seen participation in ESOL increase by 28%. And to further drive access to good literacy courses and better connect those who might not otherwise access learning, we're funding grassroots community organisations through my Skills for Londoners community outreach programme. These steps have led to London outperforming the rest of the country in reaching adult learners, meaning we can have a bigger impact on raising adult literacy levels.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the answer. I completely agree with you that good literacy skills are key to improving life chances. Specifically want to talk about, in fact, early life chances, and specifically with reference to one of my greatest heroes, Miss Dolly Parton, who we all know from her music, but also has an admirable record of charitable works. And back in 1995, she set up the Dollywood Foundation Imagination Library, which works by every month. Enrolled children from birth to age 5 are given high-quality, age-appropriate books free of charge. And since 1995, they've given out over 185 million books in many different countries, including the UK. And there's research from Swansea University that shows that this scheme has significant and measurable impact on child development and also parental literacy skills as well. At present, there are 11,000 kids in London who are benefiting from this scheme. So my ask to you is, would you be prepared to meet with the leadership of the Dollywood Foundation in London to talk about how you might support their work in your early years work?
Chair, I'm working more than 9 to 5
I was waiting for which Dolly Parton references would come out.
To address this issue. And I was hoping you were going to say, would you meet with Dolly Parton? But you changed the leadership. Chair, more than happy to. Chair, you'll be aware that we're not responsible for children literacy. That's the government. But we do work here, particularly when it comes to the Young Londoners Fund. So, Chair, can I take that away? In relation to seeing if they can assist us, because where it's useful, there's a scheme we're doing, for example, in Haringey, where we're working towards young Londoners, because it can really help for the reasons you've alluded to. So can I take that away and see whether we can work with the Dolly Parton's team to see what help they can give us in this area as well?
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
The next question is in the name of Assembly Member McCartney, and it concerns health benefits of London-wide ULEZ.
Thank you, Chair. Air pollution contributes to the premature death of around 4,000 Londoners every year, and there's an ever-growing body of scientific evidence showing the serious and life-limiting risks of air pollution on physical and mental health at every stage of life, from impairing fetal development to increasing the risk of stroke, dementia, cancer, and respiratory and cardiovascular disease in later life. This is not just a central London problem. The whole of London exceeds the WHO guideline for air quality. And just last week, a high pollution alert for the entire capital was issued. There is no safe level of exposure, and the greatest number of deaths related to air pollution occur in outer London, mainly due to the higher proportion of elderly people in these areas who are more vulnerable to the impacts of air pollution. Crucially, 5 million people are expected to breathe cleaner air and experience the associated health benefits when ULEZ is expanded to outer London. The evidence is clear. The ULEZ has already been hugely successful in central and inner London, helping reduce roadside pollution levels by nearly half in central London and a fifth in inner London, compared to a scenario without the ULEZ and its expansion. This is great progress, but there's more to do. As Mayor, I simply won't accept that the 5 million people in outer London shouldn't be able to benefit from the same life-saving health impacts that the ULEZ has already brought to the rest of our city. Everyone has the right to breathe clean air. Modelling suggests that expanding the ULEZ London-wide will lead to a reduction of nearly 10% in NOx emissions from cars in outer London and a reduction of nearly 16% in PM2.5 exhaust emissions from cars in outer London. Fewer harmful emissions mean fewer hospital admissions and fewer cases of life-changing illnesses such as asthma, heart disease and cancer. Expanding the ULEZ London-wide is an essential part of ensuring a greener, healthier and fairer future for all Londoners wherever they live in the capital.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we saw earlier this month doctors cycling around your expanded ULEZ boundary in celebration of the expansion. And one of those doctors said, "I struggle now to think of a disease that is not exacerbated or made worse by air pollution." And they also talked about the huge strain that air pollution put on hospital wards. So as your expansion comes into force, what benefits can the NHS see in coming years?
Well, thank you for referring to the medics who have been cycling around London to raise awareness of this issue and supported this life-saving, life-changing policy. So in London, we saw a third fewer children being admitted to hospital with asthma issues once the ULEZ began in that part of London. So that's a tangible difference. And anybody who's seen a child have asthma attack, it's really distressing, not just for you watching it, for the child and the parents and the carers. So the Chief Medical Officer did a report on this issue last year in relation to what more needs to be done, and he praised London for our world-leading policies. So experts have calculated that there'll be fewer hospital admissions for asthma, fewer people being diagnosed with asthma, fewer people with the other issues related to respiratory issues, heart disease, dementia, cancer, so forth. But it's worth reminding colleagues that for the adverse consequences to happen, there's got to be an accumulation of pollution. Simply for the benefits, there's got to be accumulation of a period of time. So over 20 years, we expect to see a saving to the NHS of around £10 billion by fewer health issues and a third reduction in air pollution diseases. So that's less misery and less money.
Thank you. And also this month, we've seen over 30 prominent air pollution scientists write to the Prime Minister, urging him to disassociate himself from the merchants of doubt and not undermine the factual and truth foundations of life. And just quoting from that letter, they state that mainstream politicians have been attending rallies run by conspiracy theorists. They have been loudly repeating their dismissal of our science based on social media accounts and broadcast interviews. They have spoken of not believing the science in the London Assembly and in Parliament. Can I ask you, Mr. Mayor, why do the Conservatives, both nationally and here in this chamber, not follow the evidence? And could you also explain to me, why would all the Conservative mayoral candidates say that 8 months after an expanded ULEZ. They would rip it out and make our air dirtier and more toxic.
So I accept, and I've said this on many occasions, both today and over recent weeks and months, that there are people with genuine concerns around the ULEZ expansion. We're trying to address them. Where we can't address them and deal with them, we are ameliorating the consequences of the impact on individuals, families, businesses, charities, and so forth. The letter from the experts is really important to be considered, which is those with genuine concerns have latched onto them people who deny the science. They're the same people, by the way, many of them, who deny the science with COVID, with the vaccine, climate change, and so forth. They're well funded, often, by vested interest, well resourced, and we saw some evidence of that during the consultation last summer. And it's for those Conservative politicians who are in bed with them to explain why they're so closely associated with them. But the letter from the experts is unarguable. And the Prime Minister in PMQs has also, I think, given answers which he may regret in years to come. And by the way, we know 30, 40 years ago, the tobacco lobby, conspiracy theorists, were hostile to laws to deal with the consequences of tobacco. And it's disappointing that mainstream politicians in the Conservative Party are also falling into that trap.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly. The next question is on behalf of Assembly Member Devonish, and it concerns Lancaster Gate closures.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. Transport for London is aware of the inconvenience that station closures can have for its customers and has apologised for the recent issues at Lancaster Gate. Safety is TfL's top priority, and due to safety regulations, some stations cannot remain open without a set level of staffing, including supervisors. Stations are running closed as a last resort, and TfL aims to minimise closures wherever possible and to reopen stations as soon as possible the same day. The primary cause of closure is sickness absence. Lancaster Gate Station has recently been affected by this issue. It is, of course, vital that staff and customers are protected from potential health issues, particularly during and in the wake of the devastation caused by the COVID pandemic. When there are staff shortages, TfL often moves available staff to ensure that stations with high usage, step-free access or interchange with other lines and services are prioritised where appropriate for the smooth running of the wider network. This approach has contributed to some of the recent issues at Lancaster Gate, as staff are sometimes moved to keep nearby Marble Arch Station open, where usage is nearly 3 times higher. Whilst TfL always tries to ensure that all station closures are kept to an absolute minimum, they're now looking at this process of determining how stations are selected for closure if they have no choice but to do so. More recently, action short of a strike, which covered the Lancaster Gate Station group, has contributed to the station's recent closures. TfL is committed to doing the best for its customers and is actively working to address any issues at a local level. Closures are generally the result of absence at supervisor rather than customer service assistant level, as stations require a customer service supervisor to remain open. General requirement and training were frozen during the pandemic, primarily due to the impact of COVID restrictions. TfL has recruited over 150 customer service supervisors since the freeze was lifted, but the recruitment and training process takes some time, so there are still some outstanding vacancies. TfL's latest recruitment campaign has been successful so far, and we expect to see vacancies significantly reduced in the coming months. I recognise that the repeated closure of one station is far from ideal. With staffing levels now improving significantly, there should be fewer closures going forward.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning.
Can Lancaster Gate now expect to service 7 days a week going forward, please?
Yeah, I hope so. I know the huge inconvenience it causes to your constituents. What may assist not just the additional staff that have been recruited at supervisor level is the priority order of stations being reviewed as well. I'm happy to say that the coming weeks and months will be far better for your constituents in relation to Lancaster Gate than the last few weeks and months have been.
Thank you for that. I have to pick up one thing you said there, because I got the same words from TfL. I've had a whole host of excuses from TfL from, as you said, from sickness as we recover from the pandemic. We're quite a long way away from the pandemic, but they're still using that excuse as of a couple of weeks ago. But the one I wanted to really ask you about was their second excuse, which you again repeated, which is, quote, action short of strike action, unquote. What does that even mean?
So what it means is because of the pandemic, the number of staff that left, supervisors, can't be replaced. There's often turnover in a business. So there's a gap in relation to supervisors. That gap has been filled by asking people to do overtime for supervisors because there are not enough supervisors to do that. Action short of strike means a member of a trade union could decide, could not offer those additional services. You can't be required to do overtime. And so what it means is because of the vacancies, because there are vacancies and staff may not be willing to do the overtime, you can't keep a station open if there aren't enough staff. The answer is to get the right level of staff, which is what we're doing.
Okay, I'll leave it there because of time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The next question is on behalf of Assembly Member Clark, and it concerns flooding of basement flats.
Thank you, Chair. This question's apt, bearing in mind the concerns we've got coming forward over the next few weeks. Last week I launched an independent climate resilience review to assess London's preparedness for climate impacts. This will also look at how insurance and other financial instruments can step up and play a greater role in future-proofing London. My office has recently met with major insurer Zurich to discuss evidence that flash flooding disproportionately impacts disadvantaged communities and how insurers could do more to tackle inequalities. The roundtable we set up to learn lessons from the summer 2021 floods led to the establishment of the London Surface Water Strategic Group, which brings together lead organisations responsible for surface water flooding. We're working together on London's first citywide strategy to manage flash flooding and improve flood preparedness, communications and public engagement to boost community resilience. We're sending leaflets to basement properties highlighting action basement residents can take to help minimise their risk from and prepare for flooding, as we did last year. It's clear some London homeowners do struggle to access insurance that covers flooding and worry about property blight. As Mayor, I don't have powers in this area. The government must take action. The lack of access to flood insurance is more prevalent in urban areas. The first port of call for such residents is the Flood Re scheme. This government-backed reinsurance scheme covers all forms of flooding and aims to improve access to affordable insurance to properties at risk of flooding. But some properties are not eligible. This includes many apartment blocks and large subdivided residential buildings that are common in cities like London. Some homeowners have taken action to reduce the flood risk to their properties, but the scheme doesn't recognise this reduction in risk. The scheme can also require action beyond residents' control, for example, by requiring the water companies to install flood protection measures before homes can be insured. London Boroughs, working with my offices, recently wrote to DEFRA calling for reforms to the Flood Re scheme's eligibility requirements. We also questioned why the government flood recovery grant was not activated following the summer 2021 floods.
Thank you so much for that very thorough answer. I recently was contacted by the South Hampstead Flood Action Group. Their homes were affected by earlier floods, and they're very much worried about this coming summer and the extreme weather that we may have in our city. I think one thing that's really interesting is the expected level of flooding is about 1 in 100 years, and that now seems to be even as quick as one in every 3 to 5 years. And as you alluded to, it's insurers coming together with government, and it's also the government that needs to act here. I also just want to highlight the plight of tenants in this as well, because some people are left in tenanted properties. If they don't have, if their flat is uninsurable, it means that their household items are not insured. It means that it then falls to the councils to house them temporarily. And the situation I saw last summer walking around with Tulip Sadiq's office was very, very poor. I mean, families leaning on each other, people sending their children to live with somebody else while the mess was sorted out. I'm just wondering, what resilience plans do the LFB have in place to deal with flash flooding of basement flats this coming summer?
Yeah, thanks for raising that. I mean, these are biblical events that happen every year, every other year, right? But also in the past, as a country, we've discussed coastal floods, river floods, but never thought about floods in urban areas, flash flooding caused by hard surface and so forth. We've got to do so now, as do other cities around the world. And so a number of things we are doing. First, in relation to the tenants you mentioned, that is a really important issue. Not just, by the way, the cost, damage, but also wedding albums destroyed forever, right? And things that are really important destroyed forever. So the reason why the meeting with Zurich was so we could raise with them issues around those communities who may not have insurance, how to give them insurance. But a number of things we're doing in relation to planning. Identifying the areas where we think this could happen is really important, so we're doing that. Providing people in those areas with the information, from having a bag ready to putting things high to having sandbags, so forth. So there's having insurance. That information is really important. The fire brigade need new kit. We've given them new kit. I mean, when you join the fire service, you don't think about the need to work an inflatable boat or to buy inflatable boats. Right? We're doing that. We've got that. Flood barriers and so forth. But also, it's a thing that you raised a couple of years ago was what happens in the control room. People are ringing in. How we make sure resources are properly diverted and stuff. So it includes the control room and how that works as well. So we're better prepared than we were in 2021. But I've got to be honest with you, that still won't ameliorate to zero the harm done to residents and businesses.
Thanks for that. And just finally, as you said earlier, that oftentimes it's things happening with the water company, the surface flood risks. And so in the case of South Hampstead, there's issues around Thames Water, and they in some cases they aren't doing all they can to minimise the risk of flooding. And how can they be held to account?
Yeah. So Thames Water are required to invest in water and drainage infrastructure. And in advance of the last review that Ofwat undertook, we lobbied Ofwat to say that they need to require Thames Water to do more of this stuff. And the good news is that Ofwat did apply pressure on Thames Water to make sure that action was taken. There is a turnaround plan in relation to these improvements, because some of these things are exacerbated by poor maintenance and other issues, lack of investment in drainage from Thames Water, not cleaning the sewers, so forth. The pollution referred to by Hina Bukhari, that is impactful, not just pollution, but also has an impact in relation to potentially, being one of the reasons why floods happen more so than others and are affected, and the consequences are more serious. So those are the conversations we've had with Ofwat. It's worked in relation to Thames Water, and we'll have to wait and see if there's any improvements going forward.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Cooper, and it concerns rewilding rivers and riverbanks in London.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. In my 2018 London Environment Strategy, I set a target for 10 kilometres of rivers to be restored by 2025 and 40 kilometres by 2050. I'm pleased to say that the 2025 target has already been surpassed. Over 26 kilometres has been restored since 2016, including almost 21 kilometres since the strategy was published. This fantastic achievement is thanks to the ambition and hard work of many organisations working in partnership across London to improve the health of our waterways, increasing biodiversity and restoring nature. My Green Capital, Grow Back Greener and Rewild London grants supported them by investing £1.4 million to, for example, help break the Turkey Brook out of concrete, rewild the banks of the Silk Stream and Crane, create new wetlands, meadows, woodland and orchards to improve water quality on the Brent, plant trees and install reed beds on the Lee, reintroduce water vole on Hogsmill and create new ponds, wetlands, meadows and scrub on the Eden Brook. The current round of Rewild London will take us a step closer to reaching the 2050 target, as well as projects bringing back beavers in Eden, bees in Bexley and bats in Barnes. Rewild projects awarded around £250,000 on the Eden Brook, Old River Lee and Beverley Brook, which is expected to improve up to 10.75 kilometres of waterways by March next year, making more space for nature in the city. I'm also funding up to £500,000 of work to drive forward the large-scale rewilding opportunities recommended by my rewilding task force, and I'll support the development of a local nature recovery strategy to make London a leader in urban rewilding.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm a great fan of rivers. When I first moved to London, I used to live in the Lee Valley, which was actually where I was born and brought up. And since then, I've moved to the Wandle Valley and live not a few inches away from the River Graveney. So it's really heartening to hear about all the progress that's being made. I just wondered if you could comment about bunds and the use of bunds along the river, because obviously one of the other issues, apart from our delight in Sigourney Beaver and all the bees and bats coming back to the parts of London that we've just been discussing, there is also the need to address the climate emergency, and bunds obviously have a particular role to play, both in their mitigation aspects, but also I think in terms of nature.
I was told for spoil and embargoes that the team's been really hard to prepare for, but the rewilding task force is doing some work around this, and you're right in relation to the difference they can make. So there is good news coming up, which I promise to let you know as soon as I'm allowed to do so.
Oh, that's such a teaser, isn't it? I feel very inclined to try and dig further into that. We've also had the opportunity, and bearing in mind the latest news that has resulted from a period of dry weather and then thunderstorms and then combined sewer outflows has affected everywhere across the country, including London. I wonder if you could just say something about the Thames Tideway project and what is going to be installed in some of the new pieces of public realm that are going to result from the project, apart from the obvious improvement to water quality once the tunnel is finished, the super sewer. So in relation to the Thames Tideway, putting aside the benefits from the Thames Tideway happening, how you do it can lead to other benefits as well, collateral benefit. And so you're right. So the way this has been done is just really smart. They've made sure every opportunity is used to support, urban wildlife and so forth, from new wetlands, from biodiversity enhancement, they've even thought about the texture of the river walls to make sure the texture is friendly to, various creatures and habitat and so forth. So it is really exciting. What they've also done is see where other places have done this well to learn ideas. At the same time, what's going to happen is opportunities for cultural events, markets, and other activities benefiting local communities. So it's a really good example of how the main project is building this tideway, right? But there are other things you can do to give collateral benefits as well. And in the area that you've been passionate about and you've been lobbying about for years, I think you'll be really excited about the benefits, not just in the public realm, but actually biodiversity as well in nature. Finally, Mr. Mayor, can I write to you about what's going on not just in London but elsewhere in the C40 cities and where other countries are doing interesting work? Because obviously many cities have grown up where they are because they're situated on rivers. Would that be something I can do? More than happy to, Chair. Another example, I think, of this Mayor listening. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's always good to hear from a Mayor that listens. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question has been withdrawn, and so the question after that is in the name of Assembly Member Best, and it concerns due diligence. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. I was elected to be a mayor for all Londoners, and I'm proud to run an administration that pursues policies and programmes that cater for all Londoners, not least the most vulnerable. Being a mayor for all Londoners means making sure that those with protected characteristics or those who may be marginalised or easily ignored and forgotten are prioritised during policy development. Integrated impact assessments, including equality impact assessments, though not mandatory, provide a good way of ensuring that we meet our responsibilities under the Public Sector Equality Duty as laid out in the Equality Act 2010. These impact assessments help to ensure as far as possible that our policies do not adversely affect any one particular community or group of people. I'm proud of our record at City Hall in looking out for those who are most vulnerable. Not only do we conduct equality impact assessments, we've built engagement and consultation with communities into our decision-making and policy development processes. Whether it's via our Talk London platform, regular engagement with community groups, or consultations, we're in constant conversation with London's diverse communities. That insight and consistent interaction means that we're usually aware of how policy may affect one or other community as we develop it. In cases where those potential unintended consequences are not so clear, they come out through our impact assessments. Londoners also expect us to deliver for them at pace, whether it's by cleaning up our toxic air, rewilding and greening our spaces, or feeding our primary school children. Our teams work tirelessly around the clock to implement policy programmes to short timeframes. This means sometimes our impact assessments are conducted concurrently to policy development and programme implementation, but always with enough time to mitigate against any of the conclusions made by the assessment. To ensure we're consistent across the organisation, GLA officers are currently looking at a standardised approach when considering the impact of decisions to help mitigate negative impacts and improve even further the quality of organisation-wide equalities decision making. This process is in its final stages with templates and guidance being trialled currently. A wider GLA pilot will commence in the coming weeks. Overall,
Integrated impact assessments are key to ensuring no community or group of people is left behind, and I'm committed to using them appropriately to inform decision-making in City Hall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll be very careful not to compliment you so I don't upset colleagues around the table. I'm looking mainly at your impact equality statement in regards to the free school meals policy. What concerns me is that the impact assessment, it has been, there was a mayoral direction to take that, mayoral decision to undertake that from May 2023. Obviously, the policy was announced in February 2023, so there's a huge chunk of time there that's been lost. Now, my main concern, though, is this will conclude in September 2023. The impact equality assessment, which is going to look at ways to avoid and mitigate adverse impacts and enhance benefits of the proposed policy and inform the decision-making process. That's going to close in September 2023. The scheme will launch in September 2023. So you just said there that there'll be enough, if they're running concurrently, there'll be enough time to mitigate between the conclusion and the policy being enacted. Could you ensure me or convince me of how that closure in September 2023 from the impacted assessment is going to allow you to make any changes before the policy launches into September 2023?
Thanks for your question and the issue you've raised. So the impact assessment we should have next month. So the way it works is we've got to allocate budgets at a certain time of the year, or we're not unreasonably criticised for not saying what the budget's going to be spent. So often there's an announcement of a policy, and then we work in relation to not just the impact assessment, but making sure there is the design and implementation of a scheme. In relation to universal free school meals, we've already been engaging with workshops, including with faith leaders. We've been engaging with local authorities, with schools, with caterers, as well as the integrated impact assessment. With the universal free school meals, we also have a massive advantage, which is that there are some councils already doing it: Southwark, Islington, Newham, Westminster, Tower Hamlets, and everywhere across London is doing it in reception, year 1 and year 2. So I'm confident when it comes to me signing the mayoral decision, I'll be able to do it with confidence, knowing that we'll hit the ground running in September. The alternative is waiting to make a policy announcement until after you've done the integrated assessment, which would lead me open to criticism from the Assembly for having money set aside at budget allocation and not saying what it's going to be used for.
Respectfully, I think the alternative was launching the integrated impact assessment before May 2023 to try and make sure that we had that in good time. But I am pleased to hear that you believe that will be ready next year. Are you committing that we will see that integrated impact assessment, next month? Are you committing we'll see that in July?
Well, so you can't have an integrated assessment without doing the work, and the groundwork can only be done after I allocated the money. So it would have been impossible for City Hall officers to have done the work to get ready for the assessment to begin when I made the announcement. Will it be ready
in July, though?
Firstly, I welcome your support in the U-turn in relation to universal free school meals, and I'm confident I'll have the assessment next month, so I can sign the mayoral decision. So children in London will benefit from free school meals from September.
Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, it's a lie, and you should stop repeating it.
So, Chair, that's a question because it's been put to me, and I'm lying.
I don't treat well accusations that somebody is lying, Assembly Member.
Sorry, it's just the former chair didn't mind when we called people lies in the chamber, so I'm confused. I think it's an untruth.
Chair, seeing it as me that made this, I did call Boris Johnson a liar, and I've been proved right by Parliament. We call that vindication.
We done with that? I thought a moment of peace might be appreciated. The next question has been withdrawn, and we now go on to Assembly Member Hall to ask about basic command units.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. I understand the vital importance of engaged and responsive local policing focused on the things that matter to communities. That's why I've continued to invest in neighbourhood policing, including giving the Met Police Service £26.8 million to fund an additional 500 PCSOs by March 2024. Due to my investment, there are now more police officers in London than ever before. However, I recognise the damaging impact a decade of austerity has had on neighbourhood policing in London. The Casey review describes in detail how austerity has, quote-unquote, profoundly affected the Met Police Service. Both the Commissioner and I are committed to addressing this and rebuilding a local, community-focused presence. The Commissioner has been clear that his mission is to deliver more trust, less crime and high standards, and that policing can only be delivered with the consent of Londoners. That means getting back to basics and restoring neighbourhood policing. One of our key priorities is to tackle burglary. Between January and March this year, officers attended 87.2% of residential burglaries reported via 999 or 101 calls, an increase from 81% in October-November 2022 and 31% in October-November 2021. Every London borough now has a dedicated superintendent to focus on strengthening relationships with communities and partners. This is the first step to ensuring local policing is delivering on the needs of local communities. Dashboards providing more data and greater transparency on what's happening with policing across local priorities are now publicly available. MOPAC continues to work with local BCUs to help officers better understand and deliver on issues we know affect public trust and confidence. As part of an action plan, we've worked with communities to develop a new framework to put communities at the heart of holding the Met Police Service to account in every London borough, ensuring the police are more accountable to those who are most affected by policing. But the government's continued underfunding of the National and International Capital Cities grant means that London's communities are still suffering abstractions for the policing of major events such as concerts, protests, football matches and state visits. In light of the vital need for change found by the Casey Review, I am pleased that the Commissioner and his leadership team are reviewing and consulting further on the turnaround plan. The plan will set a new and ambitious direction for policing in London.
Thank you.
One that will have the needs of local communities at its heart.
Right, okay, so since you've nearly talked me out, trust and confidence in the police has plummeted since BCUs have been put in, absolutely plummeted. It also coincides with the time that you've been mayor. So is trust and confidence plummeted because of the BCUs, Mr. Mayor, or is it plummeted because of you being such a dreadful mayor who is not concerned about policing whatsoever?
I'm afraid the
of course, Chair, because he talks us out, and that's what he does every time. He talks us out.
We'll move on to the next question, which is in the name of Assembly Member Ahmad, and it concerns childcare.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for this question. Although I don't have statutory powers over early years, helping London's children get the best start in life will always be important to me. I've established 3 early years hubs across London's boroughs to improve the quality of early years provision and promote early years as a career choice. Through our London Early Years campaign and Cost of Living Hub, we help to signpost the range of childcare support offers available. And I launched the Strong Early Years London to provide business support for London's early years providers, including an extra £30,000 investment this year. The changes proposed to the childcare system in the spring budget will go some way to help addressing the problems families face. But they don't go far enough and will still leave and likely exacerbate significant challenges for parents and providers. The funding uplift is welcome, but it does little to support for Londoners with the cost of childcare now and is nowhere near enough to meet the needs of a chronically underfunded sector. To extend the free offer without a significant uplift in funding may further destabilise the sector. The knock-on effects will mean that children don't get the early years support they need, and families are simply unable to return to work due to childcare costs, with women more likely to shoulder the burden of childcare. Similarly, the current 30 hours entitlement is directed at working people, giving others fewer opportunities to find work or access support. The changes to the ratios are also deeply concerning, particularly for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, most likely to benefit from formal early learning. Without wholesale action and investment from the government, the childcare crisis will continue to impact on the education of our Londoners, while leaving London's parents paying some of the world's highest childcare costs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the summer school holidays are coming up in a month's time, and the cost of living is still a huge concern for parents. Some low-income parents might make use of holiday clubs, but for many, childcare over the summer is often unaffordable or inaccessible. How is the GLA planning to support children and parents during the summer holiday?
Yes, a really important question. So even though we've got no statutory duties in this area, I think it's important to respond to the concerns that I've been listening to from Londoners. So there are some things we can do with the limited powers and resources we have. One is we're providing free holiday meals to those children who miss out during the school holidays. So we're working with great groups like the Felix Project and the Mayor's Fund for London, and supporting 10 million meals over the next period. In Easter, we provided 550,000 meals. Makes a big difference on half term. So we've got a big holiday activities and food programme. Second thing we're doing is providing young people with constructive things to do during the holidays. The Violence Reduction Unit will be providing many, many things for young people to do. You mentioned holiday programmes, holiday activities. They'll be providing holiday activities during the summer holidays. And the third thing I should mention is, when the holidays end, the good news is we'll be rolling out for the first time ever universal free school meals in all primary schools, which will make a big difference in relation to taking the pressure off parents, but also children eating a healthy, nutritious meal as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you. Will the Assembly agree to suspend standing orders in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Can we now move on to the next question, which is in the name of Assembly Member Desai, and it concerns policing and mental health.
Thank you, Chair. Right Care, Right Person is an operational policing model developed by Humberside Police that changes the way the emergency services respond to calls for assistance involving non-policing issues, including mental health. The national working model is being led by the Home Office in partnership with NHS and National Police Chiefs Council. In Baroness Case's review, she highlighted her concerns that Met Police officer resources were being drawn into responding to and managing mental health issues due to a lack of provision for those services. This is a national issue, but the impact in London is considerable. It takes on average over 14 hours in A&E and 8.5 hours at a health-based place of safety for MPS officers to hand over an individual they've detained under the Mental Health Act. It's estimated the Met Police Service spend well over 10,000 hours each month responding to mental health concerns and dealing with what should principally be health matters. The Met Police Service have been involved in discussions at the London Health Board about the implementation of this newly adopted national working practice. This is a much needed and positive step towards not only reducing the current demand on policing in London, but also improving outcomes for those who require mental health services. It's important that these changes are implemented well, and we work together in partnership to create a system of support that works for all Londoners. Discussions around the implementation of Right Care, Right Person are ongoing between the Met Police Service and NHS London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at this stage, Mr. Mayor, are you in a position to give us any more details as to exactly how the Met will determine what mental health episodes require the police to attend and those that don't?
So it's really important that the initial triage is done well. So a number of things are happening. So the MPS call centre staff are going to receive training, backed up by overarching legal advice on how to triage those incoming calls and making sure the appropriate course of action is taken, whether to deploy police resources or not. The key thing is where there is a real and immediate risk to life or serious harm, or where there's a core policing need to attend, the police will still attend. But that sort of conversation is taking place between the Met Police Service, the NHS and others to make sure they get it right.
And Mr. Mayor, one more question. Do you have any concerns about implementing this policy alongside making the urgent and necessary improvements to the Met's contact centre? Because these concerns were raised, the concerns about the centre were raised both in the Peel report and the Casey report.
Yeah,
in terms of the ability to respond within specified time targets.
I've got concerns to make sure that the police and the NHS can do this in a way that leads to improvements, not things getting worse. I've also spoken to Londoners whose families have mental ill health, and they don't want a police officer being the person who comes. They want a mental health expert to be the first person to come. So it's getting that balance right is really important. But it is really important we get this right. You're right, there are concerns being raised about the call centre and other issues and stuff. We've invested in that in the budget earlier on this year, but the police need to work to make sure they get that right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Polanski. Oh, I beg your pardon. Assembly Member Dr. Sahota, and I'd written it down as well, so I do apologise. Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Chairing is not easy.
It's not, is it? No.
Mr. Mayor, just coming back on the back of the question by Assembly Member Desai. Look, I think there is universal agreement that the police should only be spending their time on policing issues, and the fact that they're addressing so many of mental issues is that it's a result of underinvestment over 13 years in the NHS, and the NHS is stressed. But the question which I really have is how this policy is implemented, and the issues regarding Humberside, right? The Humberside was a small city, it was a small system. London is a much more complex system with much more complexity to it, okay? And how we ensure that this policy is implemented. Was the NHS involved, right, in this decision? Was this decision taken unilaterally by the Metropolitan Police?
I share the concerns you've raised, and Unmesh Desai has raised, and many others have raised, including the police, by the way, about making sure they get this right. And you're also right, Humberside is very different from the Met Police Service. It does not mean being disparaging, different challenges, different issues, and so forth. So the NHS has been working on a concordant in relation to making sure they treat people with mental ill health better. I think what did surprise the NHS was, and it's a matter of public record, I'm not breaching confidences, is when Sir Mark wrote to them and said, you know, he wanted to start the new system by August. That was a surprise to the NHS. But the good news is the NHS and the Met Police Service have been working really collegiately since then to make sure it lands well. You will know better than anybody else in the Assembly that mental health has been the Cinderella service for decades. There's been a lack of parity of esteem for decades, but also austerity in other services, in other public services, has compounded some of those issues and stuff. So there are big issues, there are big challenges. It is important that the Met Police Service and the NHS work together to make sure once this goes live, things don't get worse but get better. But those conversations are ongoing, taking place in a really collegiate way.
That's reassuring. The other thing I also want to say, Mr. Mayor, is that I think it's important that you, through your health board, do make sure that the health services are talking to the Metropolitan Police, and of course. It's the implementation of details. I mean, sometimes there is a patient who's mentally ill, who needs to be taken to a place of safety, lacks insight. It's primarily a health issue, but of course we need the help of the police force, for example, to transfer this patient to a place of safety. So those sort of details are worked out, right? And I just want to get an undertaking from you, right, that you'll be working collegiately with all the partners, right, make sure they are cooperating and that Londoners get a good service that they deserve.
Yeah, and this is one of the roles I can play as using my convening powers. The good news is the Commissioner is working with the NHS, and there's now been set up a Right Care, Right Person board. It has on it the police service, council leaders who know this area very well, health leaders, the ambulance service, and so forth. Because you're spot on. We've got to get the relationship right, and the Concordat goes some ways towards that, but it's really important that the really important issue you raise, when is it right and proper for a police officer to be present and so forth, and to make sure that happens properly and stuff. And so that work is being done at speed. I think the concern the police had was people have used warm words about this for ages and nothing's ever happening. And so, you know, Sir Mark needs this to happen sooner, because I've mentioned the number of hours that are spent doing stuff that's not really policing. And, you know, it's really important that those, and also it's adversely affects people with mental ill health, and so hoping this will lead to a way forward that's better for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And once again, apologies to Dr. Sahota for that. Now we do get to Assembly Member Polanski, and the subject is community-led pride events.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. London is renowned across the globe as a beacon of inclusion and diversity, and pride is an important part of the reason for this. The March of Solidarity and Celebration has helped to change our society for the better, and I understand that this year's campaign will be in support of the capital's trans and non-binary community. In London, you're free to be who you want to be and to love who you want to love, and on the 1st of July, more than 1.5 million people will once again take to the streets to send that message to the world. Because of this amazing success, Pride attracts support from all sorts of businesses, charities and organisations. I think this is a positive thing, as standing together is a key element of the movement for LGBTQI+ equality. I'm extremely proud to be counted amongst those supporters of this essential cultural and community movement. But whilst the GLA's grant funding and wider support is significant, our funding covers less than a tenth of the overall cost of the event. Pride in London, as the community organiser of the celebration, is responsible for raising the remaining funds in this difficult economic climate so that everyone can enjoy free and inclusive Pride. Public money can only go so far, so looking to commercial sponsors to support the Pride in London event is vital for its continuation. Facts for choosing these sponsors extend way beyond financial support, as the Pride in London team also need to consider the actions and policies of potential sponsors to make sure they align with the core values of visibility, unity, equality and a commitment to social and environmental responsibility. Pride in London carries out the selection and vetting process for sponsors of the event, and in the case of this year's headline sponsors, Pride in London will have reviewed their corporate responsibility report and paid close attention to their environment strategy and climate-related initiatives. As I've said, it's important this great event receives sponsorship to allow Londoners and visitors to enjoy it for free. It couldn't go ahead in its current format without it, and I hope to see as many people as possible out on the streets of central London to celebrate Pride again on the 1st of July.
Thank you. I'm a member of the LGBTIQA community, and I also care about the planet, and I'm gutted to see United Airlines as the headline sponsor for Pride in London. Now, we had this conversation just last year about the need for a fossil-free Pride, and you said, and these were your words, if you want to take part in Pride, you have to show leadership on other issues. And then you literally said, like climate. Now, I recognise the work you do on equality. I don't want to be churlish, I really do. I'm proud that we have a mayor that is LGBTIQA friendly, and we've not always had that, so thank you for that. But it ultimately doesn't count for anything if you then allow a big carbon polluter to greenwash or rainbow wash, in this circumstance, using Pride and our community. And can't you see these sponsorship opportunities are an opportunity for these companies to launder their reputation, and whether it's a tenth or 100%, you're allowing them to do that?
Well, Chair, the question implies that it's me that decides, or City Hall decides, in relation to these issues. Pride in London have issued a statement in relation to the issue raised by the member, and what Pride in London say in their short statement is Pride in London welcomes a diverse array of sponsors who undergo vetting to ensure their alignment with our core values of visibility, unity, equality and a strong commitment to social and environmental responsibility. We have United Airlines as our headline sponsor for this year. As one of the world's leading airlines, United Airlines exemplifies a commitment to excellence in both service and sustainability. United Airlines' corporate responsibility report is available publicly and addresses the topic of environmental sustainability. United Airlines' environmental commitment is also available online. It goes on to say United Airlines are the first major US airline to invest in carbon capture, supporting the work of 1.5 who are building the world's largest direct air capture facility. United Airlines has set a voluntary net zero target by 2050 and committed not to rely on the use of carbon offsets to reach that target. The company has also set commitments to increase the percentage of sustainable fuels used. It's for Pride in London to make its sponsorship decision, not the Mayor of London.
0.1% is the amount of sustainable aviation fuels. There are drag queens on RuPaul's Drag Race that are showing more climate leadership on this than you are, Mr. Mayor. This sounds like a complete abdication of responsibility. But moving on, let's talk about your relationship with United Airlines. They funded you, deputy mayors, and your team of officials trips to America last May, and they gave tens of thousands of pounds worth of free flights. Since then, we've seen a tweet promoting United Airlines. They've been given a line in the press release. I've just heard you give them a plug now for their sustainable aviation fuel, and they're the headline sponsor of Pride. It's thousands of pounds in free flights for going rate for a supposedly green mayor.
Well, I think the member will, after today, and after he's got his clip for social media, reflect on what he's said, not just about me, but about United Airlines and about Pride in London. I'm sure Pride in London will reflect on what the member has said. I'm quite clear. I'm not in favour of closing down airports in our city.
You're taking off the subject from intersectional justice. There is no LGBT climate justice if you then allow carbon-polluting companies to sponsor what should be a protest event. That's happening on your watch. Pride in London, you have a contract with them. It says in that contract that you will discuss sensitivities beforehand. This has happened. You have to take responsibility for it or not.
Well, I think everyone will have heard what the member has said. We'll be looking forward to celebrating with him on July the 1st.
Is that it? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I just let members know, be aware that we know there's a problem with the timer, and we're working very hard to try and make sure that members do know how much time they have left. Assembly Member Russell.
Sorry, before we start my question, before my time runs, can you just confirm we have 11 seconds left? Is that correct? Because the clock wasn't running during the last bit.
If 8 minutes is what we have, and 11 seconds. It's now done. Yeah, and apologies for that. We'll look into that before.
Can I just get my own clock running in case it doesn't work?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready. Thank you.
And now back to you, Assembly Member Russell. So it is you're up, and this is a question on the police use of live facial recognition.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. The appropriate use of live facial recognition can aid the police by locating wanted offenders, including high-risk individuals, identifying suspected terrorists, and locating vulnerable people, helping to keep our communities safe. It's, however, important that this technology is deployed proportionally, lawfully, and ethically, and that the Met Police Service is transparent about where, when, and how it is used to maintain the trust of Londoners. All LFR watch lists, including those for the Coronation, Camden and Islington deployments, are created as part of an operational decision within 24 hours before a deployment to ensure they are current. They're then destroyed immediately after the deployment. Live facial recognition is not deployed to quell lawful protest. It's focused on identifying wanted offenders and helping to keep the public safe. Individuals on an LFR watch list are there for policing purposes as a result of criminal activity and as part of the investigative process. Each deployment watch list is pulled from a much wider pool of these wanted individuals and takes into account the intelligence case, purpose and location of the deployment. Watch list categories are bespoke to the deployment and are available online in MPS policy documents. To aid transparency, the Met Police Service has published a considerable amount of information about LFR on its website, including the legal framework, deployment details, impact assessments, and an ethical review. The MPS has invested in new technology to address the potential for disproportionate impacts of the use of LFR and has used Home Office Science, Technology, Analysis and Research funding to commission the independent National Physical Laboratory to test the use of LFR. My Deputy for Policing and Crime and I discussed the use of LFR with the Commissioner and members of the MPS senior leadership team as appropriate to current activities and deployments. The London Police and Ethics Panel has reported on LFR and developed 5 conditions to ensure that MPS deployment follow ethical guidance. The MPS has given assurance it will comply with these recommendations and will continue to hold the MPS to account on this. I'm committed, Chair, to working with the MPS to ensure they use all opportunities to prevent, disrupt and detect crime through harnessing new technology, but this is done in a lawful, ethical, proportionate and transparent way.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, the size of the live facial recognition watch lists has ballooned since the technology was first trialled in Notting Hill Carnival in 2016, where there were just 266 people on the watch list. From those trials to first deployment in 2020, the watch list went up nearly 22 times and was about 5,800 people. And since that 2020 deployment, the watch list further doubled to over 10,000 for the Coronation. Now, do you think it is reasonable to expect that all 10,000 plus people on that watch list might have been present at the Coronation?
Well, we know one of the purposes of the transparency, the number of reasons for it, is to deter, right? So you know there's a big event taking place. You know potential bad people who are wanted may be going to that event. Letting them know there's going to be the use of live facial recognition may get them to deter. But here's the other point, which is the police do have trained spotters whose job it is to identify people who may be wanted. They can only recollect a small number of faces to recognise people who may be wanted. The advantage of the technology is more people can be on the watch list, which means that technology can work to identify those who are wanted in a far more bigger scale than individual spotters.
Mr. Mayor, these are people who are wanted for a whole range of crimes like, sexual offences, assaults, all sorts of things. They're very serious criminal offences. But just one person from the watch list was arrested at the coronation. And the Met standard operating procedure is very clear that watch lists must be driven by policing need based on an intelligence case. It must be current and reviewed before each deployment. So wouldn't it have been more efficient use of police resources to make that one arrest using conventional policing methods rather than checking the eligibility of over 10,000 people for inclusion on that watch list for that deployment?
You're assuming that one person could have been found without the LFR technology.
I'm just taking the point that the police have found people without live facial recognition technology in the past through conventional policing methods. I'm just,
but the resources. This is a precision policing tool, so it's designed for large events and uses precision. The spotters, which is human beings, is a lot cruder. There are a few people on that they can remember the faces of because they use their memories.
Mr. Mayor, the people who were on that list it was a random list of people who were wanted for offences. But I just want to move on because the Met and the courts know that people added to a watch list or simply walking by live facial recognition cameras have their Article 8 rights for private and family life engaged. Now, the use of this technology can have a really chilling effect. Data from the London Policing Ethics Panel shows that young people are much more likely to stay away from live facial recognition monitored events, as are Asian, Black and mixed ethnic groups. Now, over 1.5 million people attended Pride in London in 2022. That's potentially a lot of people who might be deterred from attending. Now, the Met hasn't used live facial recognition at Pride before, but can you briefly assure Londoners that the Met won't use live facial recognition at Pride this year?
No, Chair. I can't decide on operational matters. Let's just reflect on what's been suggested. That a politician of a political party dictates to the police on operational matters. What I can do is assure the member that the police, will consult the mayor and deputy mayor and let them know what's going on. But also the London Ethics Panel.
I'm out of time, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, you got time left here. Sorry.
We have a further question. We still have a further question.
Just to cover with Assembly Member Pigeon, you actually got your question answered, but you have 11 seconds.
I have, and I was going to say to the Mayor, thank you for your answers earlier, and could I request that at future Mayor's question times I have equally short, crisp answers so I can get through more questions?
Chair, I'm still learning.
You could have made a commitment there, but anyway, yes. Okay.
Maybe in year one, Chair, I'm wiser now.
Yeah. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Sheikh, and it concerns Business London Place Commission report.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I welcome the Place Commission's report, many of the recommendations of which align with the good growth objectives in my London plan. The report stresses the need for affordable housing, and I'm building more genuinely affordable homes than any previous mayor. My draft London plan guidance on affordable housing and viability, which is currently out for consultation, seeks to support an increase in the level and type of affordable housing delivered. The report talks about placekeeping. The GLA has long championed a place-based approach to development and provided relevant capital funding and support. I've also championed design quality and partnership working through my Good Growth by Design programme. It looks at net zero. My London plan policies are ensuring new developments play their part by minimising carbon emissions and the wider impacts of climate change. London Plan Guidance is also promoting the retrofit of existing buildings, which is an important part of London's journey to net zero. The report also looks at transport investment, recognising the limitations of the government's current funding approach for London's transport system. My Deputy Mayor for Transport and Housing recently wrote to the government setting out my priorities for infrastructure investment. My policies are helping to build a successful city that evolves and responds to the trends the report identifies. As London gets back on its feet, inclusion and well-being needs to be at the heart of the evolution of London's urban environment. London is a very successful economy, and we need to continue to translate its prosperity into inclusive growth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And as you can see from your answer, I mean, the report covers such an incredible remit, and it was great to be at the launch. Your Deputy Mayor, Jules Pipes, was also there, and it was a really fantastic discussion. I wanted to just quote John Dickey, the Chief Executive of Business London. He said, sort of, for London to thrive and remain a world-leading city, we must seize this once-in-a-generation opportunity to reimagine the capital's places and spaces following the pandemic. And I really like that framing because it takes what was a very difficult time for this country, for the world, and for London, and creates a framing for us to think about it positively in terms of what we can learn, how we can redesign our city, and the lessons that can help Londoners thrive. So, you know, your London plan, as you've alluded to, already lays a really incredible foundation for that. But, you know, also the work done by the Planning and Regeneration Committee in terms of the community groups we work with about the lessons we can learn from the pandemic has been really informative. So I wanted to ask specifically in terms of the public realm and public space, how can we continue making it more accessible for Londoners, whether that's making sure streets are more pedestrian friendly or, you know, the alfresco dining that you championed during the pandemic?
Well, Chair, as I write in my first book, Breathe, Tackling the Climate Emergency, and to paraphrase what our great leader Winston Churchill once said, you should never waste a crisis. And the pandemic was a crisis. And what the book talks about is how we're using that opportunity provided by this crisis to reimagine, in the words of the Place Commission, our city going forward. More cycling, more walking, how we can use the public realm in a variety of things, you know, art in the public realm. As Leonie Cooper is lobbying me constantly about urban rewilding, urban biodiversity in the public realm, really important. You know, Anne Clark raised the issue of resilience around flooding. We'll plant more trees, more shades, but also if we have more SUDs, sustainable urban drainage, more greenery, be less service water going into, you know, basements, stations, and so forth. So, you know, we've got to think, you know, do we go back to business as usual, pre-pandemic, or do we use this opportunity to reimagine our city? And some of that actually is quite exciting, but we've got to recognise, you know, there's an opportunity that we may not get again. And so I welcome this report. Lots of things to consider, and a lot of things, fortunately, we're acting on already.
You know, I agree with that. I think the London Partnership Board, previously the London Recovery Board, it's great that you bring stakeholders across London together to have this conversation so we can pool that expertise. Another aspect of the report, I think it's recommendation 3, is about carbon in the built environment. And this is something the Planning and Regeneration Committee are really interested in. We've just done an investigation on. So obviously we know we're in a climate emergency. We've seen how you implement the climate positive solutions in all aspects of your governance. It's really important. And I think what people don't realise is we often talk a lot about aviation, we talk a lot about car use, but 68% of London's emissions is actually from the built environment, it's from buildings. So actually if you want to take the climate crisis seriously, you have to have really effective planning policies beyond just retrofit, beyond just operational use. And what's really exciting is the London plan is leading in this area. So our policies on whole life cycle carbon approach when people are assessing how they build is further than the national government's policies on this, and actually we're trying to push the government in the right direction in regards to this. So hopefully the whole life cycle carbon approach will be picked up by national governments soon, but I wanted to ask specifically, A, how do we push industry in the right direction around this? So that's in terms of encouraging them to retrofit over demolition, and B, how do we encourage local councils to take on a whole life cycle carbon approach?
And this is really important. I mean, so the way I try and break it down when I'm explaining this is, you know, roughly speaking, third transport, third offices, third homes in relation to the cause of the challenges we are facing, roughly speaking. And so you're right about the office and the workplace. And so the whole life cycle carbon and circular economy is about thinking about, is it possible to keep the building, you know, rather than demolishing it, for example? Or, you know, are you considering those things? Retaining or reusing existing materials, existing buildings and structures if you have to demolish them for sometimes good reasons. But consider those things before you demolish is really important. Careful dismantling. Think about the reuse of building materials. Think about that. But sometimes actually construction of new buildings is more sensible because it's energy efficient, lower operational carbon emissions. So the point is, I want you at the design phase to be thinking about that, at the planning phase to be thinking about that. At the same time, we need massive government subsidy. You compare the Inflation Reduction Act act of President Biden, you compare some of the legislation that Germany's brought in, the EU's planning, compared to us, and it's embarrassing. And so I think the government's got to recognise this is an opportunity, addressing a challenge, and actually there are advantages in us moving sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Berry, and it concerns Solar Together contracts.
Thank you.
It concerns Solar Together. That was a very long title, sorry.
We set up Solar Together London because we wanted to enable more Londoners to take up solar power. Since the scheme launched in 2018, over 2,000 homes have had solar panels successfully installed. I'm angry, though, that some Londoners have received a totally unacceptable level of service by Green Energy Together from Phase 4. Their failure has not just led to stress for too many Londoners, but risks undermining public confidence in the solar industry more generally. To those impacted, I'm not only sorry, I'm deeply committed to ensuring they are transferred to other installers, deposits are protected, and refunds provided. The GLA does not have a direct contract with Green Energy Together. The company, iChooser, was contracted to select assured installation companies and entered into an agreement with Green Energy Together amongst other installation companies. Local authorities around the country have contracted iChooser for this work, including Suffolk, Surrey, Cambridgeshire, Kent and Essex. Since the problems with Green Energy Together emerged, the GLA has been attempting to resolve them through iChooser, with whom we have a direct relationship. My Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy and senior GLA officers have met with the CEO of iChooser on several occasions to raise our deep concerns about the numerous complaints and unreturned deposits. It's been made clear to iChooser that the situation faced by customers is unacceptable and must be resolved urgently. I know Assembly members will be contacted by constituents about this issue, and I've sought to ensure that members have been kept informed as this situation has developed. In the most recent communication to members at the point of GET's liquidation, the various routes to resolution were described. All affected customers have been contacted to set out their options. The right route varies depending on how the customer paid and at what stage the work had been progressed to. For some customers, the quickest route to resolution will be through the insurance they took out on their deposits or to seek a refund through their credit card provider. Any members can pass on issues to the GLA Environment team, and they will ensure that the information is communicated with iChooser and that each contact is followed up. My officers will continue to work with iChooser and industry bodies to ensure all customers are protected and lessons are learned.
I'm afraid the Green Group is out of time, so I apologise for that. Right. That comes to the end of the questions, I believe. We talked a lot about pride in these questions, and just to remind members, there is the Mayor's Pride reception. Depends whether or not you're on the list, because... but the Mayor's reception on Wednesday. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your answers. You're free to leave. Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 6th of July in the Chamber. The meeting will principally be used to question and answer as a question and answer session on the work and policies Transport for London, with the Mayor in his capacity as Chair of TfL and the TfL Commissioner. There is no urgent business requiring consideration, and therefore I close the meeting. Thank you.